Denmark's story begins long before it was a nation, long before written history, and even long before the first stones of its oldest settlements were laid. It begins with a landscape shaped by ice, sea, and wind, an environment that would quietly influence the people who eventually called it home. How does a small northern country built on scattered islands and a narrow peninsula become a place known for exploration, resilience, and some of the most stable institutions in the modern world? Understanding Denmark's history is not just about tracing events. It is about seeing how geography, culture, decisions, and pressures gradually shaped a nation's identity. Over the next 2 hours, we will follow this evolution step by step, moving through eras of expansion and decline, reform and rebuilding. The story of Denmark begins in a world that would be almost unrecognizable today. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, the land that would one day become Denmark lay under enormous sheets of ice. These glaciers, sometimes more than 1,000 meters thick, shaped the landscape as they advanced and retreated. They carved valleys, smoothed plains, and left behind the rolling hills and scattered islands that define Denmark's geography. As the climate slowly warmed, the ice melted and pulled back toward the far north. What remained was a mosaic of newly revealed land, freshwater lakes, marshes, and a coastline that shifted dramatically as sea levels rose. The earliest humans entered this transforming environment soon after the ice retreated. They were hunter-gatherers, following herds of reindeer, elk, and later red deer. Archaeologists often refer to the earliest known culture in this region as the Maglemos culture, named after an excavation site on the island of Zealand. These early communities lived around lakes and wetlands, using bone, antler, and stone tools. They crafted fishing gear, carved wooden paddles, and built small settlements along the water's edge. Their world was defined by mobility and adaptation. As the climate continued to warm, forests spread across the region, replacing tundra and attracting new species of animals. Humans adapted as well, shifting from reindeer hunting to exploiting the rich coastal and forest resources. Around 8,000 years ago, the rising sea levels reshaped Scandinavia. What had once been a land bridge connecting Denmark to southern Sweden gradually submerged. The Baltic Sea expanded, and the familiar outline of Denmark's islands and the Jutland Peninsula emerged. This transformation had long-term consequences. From this point onward, Denmark evolved as a maritime environment. Its people would always be shaped by the sea, relying on it for food, travel, and later, trade and exploration. Geography did not determine everything, but in Denmark's case, it consistently influenced how societies developed. After the Maglemos culture came the Kongamos and Ertebøl cultures, each representing steps forward in technology, settlement stability, and social organization. The Ertebøl culture, named after a site in northern Jutland, is especially well known. These communities flourished around the 6th millennium BCE, and they left behind extensive shell middens. Large piles of oyster shells mixed with tools, bones, and household debris. These middens are not glamorous, but they are rich sources of information. They show that coastal life provided abundant food, allowing groups to settle for longer periods and develop more complex social practices. People used advanced stone tools, pottery, and fishing nets. They traveled by dugout canoes and maintained wide networks of exchange with neighboring regions. For thousands of years, these hunter-gatherer societies lived in balance with their environment. Their lives were dynamic and often challenging, but they had a deep understanding of the natural world. Archaeological evidence shows careful craftsmanship, attention to seasonal cycles, and strong community ties. When we look at this period, it is important to remember that these were fully developed human societies, not simplistic or primitive stages on a straight line toward modernity. They adapted to their surroundings with skill and creativity, building cultures suited to the land they inhabited. A major turning point occurred around 400 BCE with the arrival of farming communities. This shift did not happen overnight. For some time, hunter-gatherer groups and early farmers lived side by side. The introduction of agriculture into Denmark is generally linked to the spread of Neolithic cultures from Central Europe, especially the funnel-beaker culture. These communities brought domesticated animals such as cattle, pigs, and sheep, cultivated crops like wheat and barley, and introduced new forms of pottery and stone tools. Most importantly, they brought a new relationship with the land. Instead of moving seasonally, they established permanent settlements, cleared forests, and built fields. The impact of agriculture was profound. Permanent settlement encouraged population growth and led to new forms of social organization. Communal labor became more common, especially in constructing buildings, clearing land, and maintaining farms. Over time, these early agricultural societies developed shared religious and ceremonial practices. One of the most striking expressions of this new cultural world was the construction of megalithic tombs, large stone burial chambers covered by earth mounds, some of which still stand today. These megaliths reveal several things about early Danish society. First, they suggest a strong sense of community identity, since building them required large groups of people cooperating over extended periods. Second, they indicate that people believed in a continued presence of the dead within the community. Burial practices became more elaborate, with multiple individuals buried together over generations. Finally, the construction of such monuments points to the existence of leaders or influential families who could organize labor and resources. Although we cannot know their names, these were the first signs of social hierarchy in Danish prehistory. As the Neolithic period progressed, new technologies continued to spread. The introduction of polished stone axes made clearing forests more efficient, expanding farmland. Pottery became more refined, and long-distance trade connections expanded. Flint from Denmark reached distant parts of Europe, while materials like amber, prized for its beauty, became an important export. Some of the amber found in Mycenaean Greece and ancient Egypt likely began its journey along Danish shores, carried through trade networks that connected much of the continent. By the late Neolithic and the transition into the Bronze Age, around 2300 BCE, the region again experienced significant change. Metalworking arrived, first in the form of bronze tools and weapons. This technology spread unevenly, and early on, bronze was still rare. Over time, however, bronze items became more common and began replacing stone tools. Metalworking required specialized knowledge and long-distance trade routes to obtain copper and tin, the two components of bronze. This encouraged the growth of elite groups who controlled access to these materials. The appearance of high-quality bronze swords, axes, and ornaments suggests that leaders used material culture to show status and authority. The climatic conditions of the Bronze Age were relatively warm, which supported farming communities across Denmark. Burial mounds from this period, often placed on high ground, show a continued tradition of honoring the dead. Many mounds contain well-preserved remains, thanks to the acidic soil and particular burial conditions. One of the most famous Bronze Age artifacts from Denmark is the Trundholm sun chariot, a small bronze and gold sculpture depicting a horse pulling a gilded sun disk. Discovered in a bog in the early 20th century, it provides remarkable insight into Bronze Age beliefs about the movement of the sun and the cycle of day and night. While we cannot attribute it to a named individual, it reflects a sophisticated symbolic world. Another important category of finds from this time is the bog bodies, preserved human remains found in Denmark's peat bogs. Some of the most famous examples, like the Graubald man and the Tulland man, date to the later Iron Age rather than the Bronze Age, but they illustrate a long tradition of depositing offerings in wetlands. Bogs played a central role in religious life, serving as places where weapons, tools, animals, and sometimes people were placed as sacrifices. These remains give modern researchers rare opportunities to study clothing, hairstyles, diet, and even health conditions of people who lived thousands of years ago. As the Bronze Age transitioned into the early Iron Age around 500 BCE, new challenges and changes emerged. The climate began to cool, which likely affected harvests and settlement patterns. Iron technology spread into Denmark from Central Europe, bringing stronger and more durable tools. Iron production did not depend on rare imported materials. It could be produced locally from bog iron. This made advanced tools more accessible and allowed for expanded agriculture, improved woodworking, and more effective weaponry. During the Iron Age, the region saw the emergence of larger communities and more defined social structures. Evidence of longhouses, storage pits, and defensive structures suggests that settlements became more permanent and more organized. Increasing interaction with neighboring regions, including Celtic and Germanic groups, introduced new ideas and goods. Trade routes grew more complex, connecting Denmark to distant parts of Europe. As Denmark moved fully into the Bronze Age, the region began to change in ways that would set the stage for the emergence of early leadership, long-distance exchange, and the first clear expressions of cultural identity. Unlike the earlier hunter-gatherer and early farming periods, which were shaped mainly by local environments and gradual transitions, the Bronze Age introduced a new element, the influence of distant lands. Metals, ideas, and styles flowed into Denmark from far beyond its shores, connecting it to a wider European world. Those connections brought not only new materials, but also new forms of social organization. Bronze itself was the catalyst. Because bronze depends on copper and tin, materials that Denmark did not possess in significant quantities, its appearance demanded extensive trade networks. Copper likely traveled from the mining regions of Central Europe, while tin may have come from as far as the British Isles. The people living in the lands that would later become Denmark did not simply receive foreign goods, they actively participated in an exchange system stretching across the continent. This system was not controlled by a single group, but operated through networks of traders, chiefs, and craftsmen who understood the value of these new materials. Archaeological discoveries show us that Danish bronze goods were not merely practical tools. They were also symbols of status and power. The craftsmanship seen in bronze swords, axes, and ornaments suggests specialized knowledge. These items required careful casting, shaping, and polishing. Many were decorated with spirals, sun motifs, and geometric patterns that reflect shared beliefs across the Nordic Bronze Age. Some scholars believe that these motifs connect to a religious focus on the sun, perhaps linked to the agricultural cycles that shaped daily life. If the earlier Neolithic megaliths hinted at community structure, the Bronze Age artifacts reveal clearer evidence of emerging elites. One of the most famous pieces, the Trundholm sun chariot, discovered in a bog on Zealand, remains one of the defining symbols of this era. Though its exact meaning is still debated, its design, a bronze horse pulling a gilded sun disk, reflects connections to broader European beliefs about cosmic cycles. Objects like this, however rare, show that religious ideas in the region were becoming more sophisticated. Rituals and ceremonies would have taken place under the guidance of individuals who held privileged positions. These figures may not have wielded the political power of later kings, but they occupied a central place in social life. As the Bronze Age progressed, the landscape began to reflect these growing social differences. Burial mounds, already common in earlier periods, took on new significance. They were built prominently on hilltops and ridges, often visible for great distances. Their placement suggests deliberate attempts to assert control over the land. Inside these mounds, archaeologists have found wooden coffins containing well-preserved bodies wrapped in woolen clothing and furs. The Egtved girl, discovered in Jutland, offers a remarkable glimpse into the life of a young woman around the early 2nd millennium BCE. Her finely woven clothing, bronze belt plate, and hair ornaments hint at her elevated social status, though we cannot attribute her to any named lineage. These burials are important because they show how wealth and prestige were distributed. High-ranking individuals were buried with elaborate goods, while others received simpler graves. This inequality does not indicate a rigid caste system, but it suggests that families or clans began to accumulate influence over generations. Leaders likely controlled trade networks, organized ritual activities, and coordinated labor for building monuments. Their authority was not absolute in the way later kings would rule, but it was enough to shape community decisions. The transition from the Bronze Age to the early Iron Age brought further social and technological changes. Iron replaced bronze not because it was inherently superior, but because it was more accessible. Farmers and craftsmen could produce iron tools themselves using local bog iron, making them less dependent on long-distance trade. Iron axes, plowshares, and knives improved agricultural productivity. These tools also allowed for more extensive forest clearing, enabling larger and more stable settlements. With better tools and improved farming methods, Denmark's population began to grow. As settlements expanded, so did the complexity of social organization. Evidence from archaeological sites shows clusters of longhouses arranged in villages, suggesting a degree of planning. These longhouses, constructed from timber and thatch, served as both living spaces and places for storing goods. They often housed extended families, livestock, and work areas under a single roof. The effort required to maintain these structures implies shared responsibilities and cooperation among family members. The Iron Age also brought advances in textile production. Woolen fabrics became more varied and finely woven, with new dyes and patterns appearing in clothing. These textiles were not only practical, but also a way of expressing regional identity. Small differences across Denmark hint at subtle local traditions. People were defining themselves through dress, tools, and rituals, creating cultural boundaries long before political borders existed. Interactions with neighboring societies continued to grow during the Iron Age. Danish communities encountered Celtic groups to the south and Germanic tribes in northern Europe. Trade brought new styles of jewelry, pottery, and weaponry. Ideas traveled as well. The influence of Celtic art can be seen in intricate metalwork found in Danish graves, while imported brooches and beads show the movement of goods across cultural lines. These exchanges did not erase local traditions. Instead, they enriched them. The blending of styles suggests that Danish communities were both open to external influences and confident in their own cultural identity. One of the most intriguing aspects of this period is the rise of ritual offerings. The tradition of depositing valuable items in bogs and lakes became even more prominent in the later Bronze and early Iron Ages. Weapons, tools, and ornaments were deliberately placed in wetlands, often in pristine condition. These deposits were not random losses but intentional acts, likely connected to religious beliefs about the spirits of the land and water. Bogs were seen as liminal spaces, neither land nor water, making them powerful locations for communication with the gods or ancestors. Over time, these offerings expanded to include large caches of weapons, spears, swords, and shields, arranged carefully before being placed in lakes. Some scholars interpret these as war trophies, possibly the equipment of defeated enemies. Others see them as symbolic displays of community strength. Whatever the motivation, they demonstrate that warfare or organized conflict played some role in Iron Age society. Chiefs or leaders who controlled these rituals would have reinforced their authority through public displays of wealth and military success. The bog bodies found in Denmark also reflect the significance of wetlands in ritual practice. These individuals, preserved by the unique chemistry of peat bogs, provide direct evidence of clothing, hairstyles, and health. They also raise questions about their deaths. Many were carefully placed in the bogs, sometimes with cords or belts around their necks. While interpretations vary, the prevailing view is that at least some were sacrificial offerings. These practices show that Iron Age religion involved complex rituals carried out by designated leaders or religious specialists. Another striking development during the Iron Age was the appearance of early hill forts and defensive structures. These forts were not military strongholds in the later medieval sense, but they reveal growing concerns about security. Conflicts between communities or pressure from migrating groups may have encouraged the construction of these defenses. Their locations, often on elevated positions with wide visibility, suggest strategic planning. Chiefs or community leaders likely organized the labor required to build and maintain these structures, strengthening their authority. By the first centuries of the Iron Age, roughly around the beginning of the first millennium BCE, the region that is now Denmark began to show characteristics of a connected cultural zone. While not unified politically, the people shared similar burial practices, artistic styles, and agricultural methods. These similarities did not make them a single nation, but they did form a cultural foundation from which later Danish identity would emerge. Throughout this time, leadership structures continued to develop. Some communities appear to have been governed by powerful families who controlled surplus production and trade. These leaders likely hosted feasts, sponsored rituals, and commanded respect through their wealth and generosity. Their influence would become more formalized in the centuries that followed, particularly as the region entered the late Iron Age and early historical period. As the Iron Age progressed toward its later phases, contact with the Roman Empire brought new goods and new ideas into Northern Europe. Roman coins, glassware, and bronze vessels have been discovered in Danish graves and settlements. Although Denmark was never part of the Roman Empire, its people were drawn into the economic and diplomatic network surrounding it. Some may have served as mercenaries in Roman armies, returning home with foreign items and experiences that elevated their status. These connections helped introduce new social practices, such as more elaborate feasting traditions and hierarchical leadership structures. The dawn of the Viking Age marks one of the most transformative periods in Denmark's history. By the time the early Viking centuries arrived, the people living across Jutland and the surrounding islands had already developed complex societies rooted in farming, craftsmanship, and local leadership. What changed during the early medieval centuries was not simply technology or trade, but the scale of ambition. Danish communities began turning outward, forging connections, alliances, and conflicts across wide stretches of Europe. This shift did not occur suddenly. It developed from the circumstances of the late Iron Age, when growing populations, increased wealth, and regional competition encouraged exploration and expansion. One of the most important factors behind the rise of Viking-era Denmark was maritime innovation. Long before the first recorded raids, coastal communities were mastering boat-building techniques that allowed them to travel farther and faster than before. The sleek, flexible designs of their wooden vessels combined speed with stability. These boats could traverse deep ocean waters, yet also glide into shallow rivers. This versatility allowed early Danish seafarers to reach trading networks stretching from the British Isles to the Baltic shores. The mastery of the sea became more than a practical skill. It became a defining part of cultural identity. The Viking Age is often remembered for dramatic raids, but many of the earliest voyages were commercial in nature. Danish merchants traveled to ports such as Hedeby, Ribe, and Birka, establishing networks that moved goods like furs, amber, wool, and ironwork. Hedeby, near the base of the Jutland Peninsula, became one of the most important trading towns in Northern Europe. Its strategic position at the crossroads of the Baltic and North Sea allowed traders to control routes between Scandinavia, the Frankish realms, and the Slavic lands to the east. Archaeological finds from Hedeby include finely crafted jewelry, imported pottery, glass beads, and coins from distant regions. These discoveries show the diversity of cultures interacting in Danish markets. But economic growth often brings new tensions. As trade expanded, so did competition within and between Scandinavian communities. The desire to control ports, routes, and resources contributed to political consolidation. Smaller chiefdoms began merging into larger territories ruled by influential leaders. These leaders did not have the centralized authority later kings would possess, but they commanded loyalty through gifts, military success, and religious prestige. Their power rested on the ability to gather warriors and maintain alliances. It was within this context that the first Viking raids emerged. While scholars debate the exact causes, several factors likely overlapped. Population growth created pressure on land and resources. Ambitious leaders sought wealth and prestige abroad, and the political fragmentation of Europe presented opportunities. Monasteries and coastal settlements, often lightly defended, contained gold, silver, and manuscripts of significant value. Raiding became a way to acquire wealth quickly and to reward followers. Leaders who could deliver treasure and success gained status, while those who failed risked losing influence. The earliest known Viking raid associated with Scandinavia took place on the island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria. Although the raiders' exact origin is still debated, many historians believe Danish groups were among the first wave of northern raiders targeting British territories. The Lindisfarne attack shocked Christian Europe. Churches and monasteries had rarely faced seaborne threats of this kind. The suddenness of the raids created a reputation for unpredictability, but the motivations were practical. Monasteries contained accumulated wealth and had limited defenses. In the decades that followed, Danish raiders expanded their operations. They targeted coastal and riverside regions in the British Isles, Francia, and sometimes beyond. Raiding parties launched quick strikes, carrying away victims, valuables, animals, and supplies. But raids were only one dimension of Viking activity. Danish groups also engaged in seasonal trade, hired themselves as mercenaries, and occasionally settled in conquered territories. As opportunities grew, so did the scale of the expeditions. Fleets of ships traveled in coordinated groups, directed by leaders who commanded respect through personal skill and diplomatic relationships. One key development during this early Viking period was the rise of regional Danish rulers who began to influence broader Scandinavian politics. While the historical record from these centuries is fragmented, several names appear in foreign chronicles. Leaders like King Gudfred are noted for their interactions with the Carolingian Empire. According to Frankish sources, Gudfred extended his influence over parts of southern Jutland and the region around Hedeby. His actions demonstrate that early Danish kings, or proto-kings, sought to strengthen their control over trade routes and strategic fortifications. For example, he is associated with improvements to the Danevirke, an extensive system of fortifications stretching across the base of the Jutland Peninsula. This massive earthwork defended Danish lands from encroaching Frankish forces, showing that Danish politics were not limited to maritime ambitions, but also included defensive strategy on land. These rulers did not govern a unified state in the modern sense. Their authority depended on personal relationships, military success, and religious legitimacy. Viking-era religion remained rooted in the Old Norse belief system, where gods such as Odin, Thor, and Freyr played central roles. Religious leaders, whether chieftains or specialist priests, performed rituals that honored ancestors and deities. These ceremonies often took place at local sacred sites rather than large temples. The blending of political and religious roles helped leaders maintain authority, especially when seeking support for raiding or trading ventures. The expanding influence of early Danish leaders also came from settlement abroad. In the British Isles, Danish groups established semi-permanent bases along the coasts and river systems. These bases allowed raiders to overwinter, repair ships, and prepare for new campaigns. Over time, some of these bases evolved into permanent settlements. This pattern can be seen in parts of Ireland and the area later known as the Danelaw in England. While the major political developments of the Danelaw occurred later, the groundwork was laid during this early phase of Danish expansion. Communities in these foreign territories maintained cultural ties with their homelands, creating a web of relationships that extended Danish influence far beyond the peninsula. Meanwhile, Danish interaction with the Baltic region also increased. To the east, along the coasts of present-day Sweden, Finland, and the Baltic states, Danish traders exchanged goods with local groups. They also encountered Slavic communities along the southern Baltic, participating in the exchange of raw materials, crafted goods, and occasionally slaves. These interactions helped create a sense of cultural cohesion among the Scandinavian peoples, even as they competed with each other. Shared language, mythology, and artistic styles reinforced a broader Norse identity, although regional differences persisted. Another factor shaping the early Viking Age was the introduction of new shipbuilding techniques. The iconic longships were expertly designed with overlapping planks, flexible hulls, and shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate both open seas and inland rivers. Crews could row or sail depending on conditions, and the ship's symmetry allowed them to reverse direction quickly. These innovations gave Danish warriors and merchants unprecedented mobility. Control of the seas became a key source of power. As Danish leaders expanded their reach, they developed more formalized systems of governance. Assemblies known as things served as early legal and political institutions. Free men gathered to resolve disputes, approve decisions, and maintain social cohesion. These assemblies were not democratic in the modern sense, but they were an important part of Scandinavian political culture. Leaders relied on things to legitimize their authority and maintain support among local populations. By the time the Viking Age reached its later centuries, the political landscape of Scandinavia had changed dramatically. Danish leaders had grown more ambitious, wealth flowed through expanding trade networks, and military expeditions had become larger and more coordinated. In this environment, the conditions emerged for the rise of a ruler capable of uniting not only Danish territories, but also distant kingdoms across the North Sea. That ruler was Knut the Great, a king whose achievements placed Denmark at the center of Northern European politics for a brief but remarkable period. The roots of Knut's rise began with earlier developments in Anglo-Scandinavian relations. For decades, English kingdoms had faced increasing pressure from Viking forces. Danish raiding groups, once seasonal and sporadic, had evolved into organized armies that overwintered in England, negotiated settlements, and demanded tribute. The English term for these payments, danegeld, reflected a growing expectation that wealth could buy peace with northern warriors. These payments enriched Danish leaders and strengthened their ability to pursue further ambitions. In this climate, a Danish leader named Svein Forkbeard launched a campaign that would change the balance of power in England. Svein's campaigns were not simply raids, they were calculated efforts to undermine English defenses and force political concessions. His success culminated in his recognition as King of England, although his reign was extremely brief. Svein died shortly after achieving this goal, but his efforts set the stage for his son, Knut, to inherit a claim that reached beyond Denmark's traditional borders. Knut's early years are not well documented, but foreign sources describe him as a capable commander who had already gained experience in warfare. After Svein's death, English resistance attempted to reassert control, forcing Knut to regroup. He withdrew temporarily, gathered new supporters, and assembled a formidable army. With renewed strength, he returned to England and pursued a deliberate campaign to secure the throne. His determination and strategic skill allowed him to build alliances with local English nobles, who saw cooperation as a pragmatic choice. Knut's eventual victory allowed him to establish a stable rule in England. This achievement alone would have been significant, but Knut's ambitions extended further. He sought to integrate England into a wider network of power centered on the North Sea. To accomplish this, he used a combination of political negotiation, military strength, and symbolic gestures. One of his most effective strategies was his marriage to Emma of Normandy, widow of the previous English king. This alliance helped him gain legitimacy among English elites and strengthened ties between England and continental Europe. While governing England, Knut remained deeply connected to Denmark. He traveled frequently across the sea, ensuring that his authority was recognized in both realms. His ability to maintain control over distant territories was supported by loyal followers and by administrative structures that balanced local autonomy with overarching leadership. Knut's rule demonstrated an early form of what might be called a maritime empire, one held together not by continuous land borders, but by mastery of the sea. Knut's influence expanded further when he gained control over Norway. The political situation in Norway had been unstable, with multiple leaders competing for authority. Knut used a combination of diplomacy and military pressure to position himself as the dominant force. His success in Norway provided him with an interconnected realm stretching from the British Isles through Denmark and into Scandinavia. This formation is often referred to as the North Sea Empire, a term that captures how Knut's territories were bound together by sea routes rather than by a single landmass. Governance across such a wide region required careful management. Knut recognized that ruling England, Denmark, and Norway demanded different approaches, tailored to local traditions. In England, he maintained many existing laws and institutions, presenting himself as a just and stable monarch. He issued legal reforms and respected church leadership, aligning himself with Christian traditions that held great influence. His decision to issue law codes in English rather than imposing foreign customs demonstrated his pragmatism. In Denmark, his authority rested on long-standing relationships with Danish elites. His English wealth supported his power at home, allowing him to reward followers and maintain loyalty. The flow of silver and goods from England enhanced Denmark's position within Scandinavia. Meanwhile, in Norway, Knut appointed local earls to manage day-to-day affairs, balancing regional autonomy with overarching royal authority. Religion played an increasingly important role in Knut's rule. While earlier Danish rulers had maintained traditional Norse practices, Knut embraced Christianity more fully. His public support for the Christian Church strengthened his legitimacy across his kingdom, especially in England, where religious institutions were deeply woven into governance. Knut made pilgrimages, endowed monasteries, and positioned himself as a pious king who sought divine favor. This shift signaled the growing integration of Denmark into the Christian world. Knut's influence extended beyond internal matters. He acted as a mediator and power broker among European rulers, forming alliances and negotiating disputes. His correspondence with the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope reflected Denmark's elevated position. Under Knut, the North Sea region became a center of diplomatic activity, with Denmark no longer operating on Europe's periphery, but standing as a significant political force. Despite his broad achievements, Knut's empire had limitations. Its cohesion depended heavily on his personal authority. There was no unified administrative system capable of surviving major political change. Regional loyalties remained strong, and communication across the realm depended on long sea voyages that could be challenging. Thus, while Knut held his empire firmly during his lifetime, its foundations were fragile. Knut's death marked a turning point. Without his unifying presence, the North Sea Empire began to fracture. His sons, Harald Harefoot and Harthacnut, attempted to maintain control but faced political turmoil and competing claims. England eventually slipped away from Danish control, returning to native English rule. Norway also broke away, reasserting its independence under local leaders. Denmark remained, but its moment at the center of a vast maritime network had passed. Even though Knut's political union did not endure, its impact on Denmark was lasting. The period showed that Danish rulers were capable of projecting power far beyond their homeland. It also strengthened Denmark's connections to the Christian and political developments of continental Europe. The empire left behind administrative practices, cultural exchanges, and dynastic ties that influenced future centuries. The transformation of Denmark from a society rooted in Norse pagan traditions to a Christian kingdom was one of the most significant cultural shifts in its early history. This change did not happen quickly, nor was it the result of a single event or ruler. Instead, it unfolded over several centuries, shaped by evolving political needs, growing contact with Christian neighbors, and the ambitions of emerging Danish kings who saw Christianity as a pathway to stronger, more centralized authority. The conversion marks the transition from the Viking world into the medieval era, laying foundations that would define Denmark's identity for generations. Before Christianity reached Denmark, religion played a central role in social cohesion. Communities honored gods such as Odin, Thor, and Freyr through rituals performed at sacred groves, household altars, and gathering places. These rituals reinforced a shared worldview and helped maintain alliances between families and local leaders. Religious authority was intertwined with political leadership. Chieftains and kings did not simply rule, they were responsible for maintaining the favor of the gods. The idea that religion could be separated from governance would have been foreign to early Danish society. The first recorded interactions between Danish leaders and Christianity came from the influence of the Carolingian Empire to the south. As early as the 8th century, Frankish missionaries traveled northward hoping to spread their faith. Their efforts met limited success at first, as Danish rulers were cautious about adopting a religion associated with a powerful neighboring empire. Accepting Christianity could be perceived as accepting foreign influence, something early kings sought to avoid. Yet these early encounters planted seeds that would take root in later centuries. Contact with Christian regions increased steadily during the Viking Age. Danish traders and warriors encountered Christianity in England, France, and various coastal regions across northern Europe. Some Danish individuals converted abroad, often while serving as mercenaries or negotiating with Christian rulers. These personal conversions did not initially reshape Danish society, but they introduced new ideas and customs. In some cases, converted Danes returned home with Christian spouses or foreign advisors, slowly adding to the presence of the new faith. The turning point in Denmark's conversion is traditionally associated with Harald Bluetooth, a king known for unifying large portions of Danish territory. While the exact details of Harald's conversion are debated, historical sources agree that he embraced Christianity and promoted it within his realm. An early account describes a dispute involving a German missionary named Popo, who allegedly demonstrated the power of the Christian God by carrying a heavy piece of iron without being harmed. Whether literal or symbolic, the story reflects how Christian leaders sought to prove their faith's legitimacy in a society accustomed to signs and omens. Harald's decision to support Christianity was not purely religious. It had strong political motives. By aligning with the Christian Church, he gained recognition from Christian rulers in Europe, strengthening diplomatic ties and reducing the threat of conflict. Christianity also offered tools for centralization. The Church brought literacy, record-keeping, and administrative structures that could support royal authority. Aligning with the Church gave Harald a powerful ally in his efforts to unify diverse Danish territories under a single crown. The physical symbol of Harald's achievements is the famous Jelling Stone, which he erected to commemorate his parents and to declare that he had made the Danes Christian. This monument, carved with runes and decorated with intricate art, bridges the world of pagan traditions and Christian symbolism. It stands near burial mounds that date to earlier centuries, visually representing the transition from ancestral customs to a new religious identity. The Jelling complex became a central landmark of early Danish monarchy, linking royal authority with Christian legitimacy. Implementing Christianity across Denmark required more than royal proclamation. The shift demanded new institutions, trained clergy, and the construction of churches. Missionaries from the German Archbishopric of Hamburg-Bremen played an influential role in organizing the early Danish church. They worked to establish bishoprics, train priests, and build alliances with local leaders. These early missionaries faced challenges, including language barriers and the need to adapt Christian teachings to local customs. Despite these difficulties, they laid the foundations of a structured church within Danish society. One of the early challenges in conversion was integrating Christian practices with long-standing traditions. Pagan rites did not disappear immediately. Archaeological evidence shows continued offerings at old ritual sites, even after Christianity had been officially adopted. Some early churches were built near or directly over older sacred spaces, likely as a way to ease the transition. Over time, however, Christian rituals replaced pagan ones, and feast days linked to the old gods were reinterpreted within Christian frameworks. The shift was gradual and varied widely from region to region. As Christianity spread, it transformed social and cultural life. The establishment of parishes created new community structures. Burial practices changed, shifting from cremation or mound burials to Christian churchyard burials. Religious festivals began to align with the Christian calendar. The introduction of written Latin allowed the recording of laws, treaties, and histories, something that had previously relied on oral tradition. The church became a center of learning, offering access to knowledge from across Europe. Christianization also altered political dynamics. Kings gained new tools to assert their authority. With church support, monarchs could claim divine sanction for their rule. Bishops and clergy provided administrative assistance, helping to collect taxes, enforce laws, and promote stability. The church's hierarchical structure mirrored the emerging central authority of the monarchy, making it an ideal partner in state building. The process of consolidation continued under Harald Bluetooth's successors. As Danish rulers strengthened their control over their territories, the Church's influence grew alongside them. Through the 11th and 12th centuries, Denmark saw the establishment of permanent bishoprics in regions such as Aarhus, Ribe, Odense, and Roskilde. These centers became hubs for religious instruction, manuscript production, and political coordination. They also linked Denmark more closely to the broader Christian world, particularly through the influence of the archbishopric in Hamburg-Bremen and later the Archbishopric of Lund. Christianity also played a role in Denmark's expanding diplomatic relationships. The new faith created common ground with other Christian kingdoms, allowing Danish rulers to participate in alliances, negotiations, and intermarriages that would have been unlikely in earlier periods. Danish kings gained recognition from the papacy, reinforcing their legitimacy. This network of relationships helped protect Denmark from external threats and bolstered its status in Northern Europe. The shift toward Christian kingship also changed the role of the monarchy itself. Instead of relying solely on personal wealth, loyalty, and martial strength, kings began to adopt the language and structure of Christian rulership. They patronized churches, supported monastic communities, and issued written laws. These changes helped to standardize governance across the kingdom. By promoting uniform Christian practices, rulers could unify disparate regions under shared religious and legal expectations. One of the important developments following consolidation was the growth of monasticism in Denmark. Monasteries became centers of agriculture, learning, and economic activity. They introduced new farming techniques, managed large estates, and served as places where manuscripts were copied and preserved. Monastic communities contributed to the spread of literacy and the development of early Danish chronicles. Their influence extended into social life, providing care for the poor, education for the young, and spiritual guidance for the broader population. Over time, the cultural influence of Christianity reshaped Danish identity. Norse mythology, while still present in folk memory, gradually receded from public life. Christian saints and biblical stories replaced the old pantheon. Churches became focal points in towns and villages, their wooden or stone structures symbolizing the endurance of the new faith. Art and symbolism changed as well. The cross became a central motif, replacing earlier symbols related to the sun, the world tree, or ancestral spirits. This transformation did not eliminate all conflict. Tensions occasionally arose between ecclesiastical leaders and the monarchy, especially as the church gained wealth and authority. Disputes over land rights, taxation, and clerical privileges emerged as both institutions sought to define their roles. Yet these conflicts were part of the broader process of shaping a medieval Danish state that blended royal authority with Christian legitimacy. As Denmark entered the medieval era, the kingdom began to take on a more recognizable political and social form. The earlier centuries of conversion and consolidation had created the frameworks of monarchy and church, but now these structures expanded in influence. Denmark became part of a broader European world defined by trade networks, feudal relationships, and shifting alliances. The medieval era brought new towns, new economic patterns, and a series of political developments that eventually tied Denmark to its Scandinavian neighbors in one of the most ambitious unions of the Middle Ages. During the early medieval centuries, Danish kingship continued to evolve. While earlier rulers had depended heavily on personal authority and local alliances, medieval kings increasingly relied on administrative systems supported by the church. Written laws, charters, and royal decrees became more common, allowing kings to formalize their authority in ways that earlier Viking leaders had not. The monarchy still faced internal competition, but the tools of governance were becoming more sophisticated. One of the most notable transitions of this era was the rise of towns. Medieval Denmark saw the growth of urban centers that served as hubs for trade, craftsmanship, and administration. Towns such as Ribe, Roskilde, Lund, Odense, and later Copenhagen became important regional centers. Their development reflected broader European trends, as merchants, artisans, and clergy formed communities that contributed to economic diversification. These towns were often founded near waterways, allowing easy access to trade routes across the Baltic Sea and the wider European world. Danish merchants exchanged goods such as fish, grain, hides, and wool, while importing luxury goods including wine, fine textiles, and metalwork. Markets operated under royal protection, and kings granted towns special privileges that encouraged commerce. Urban charters provided rules for trade, taxation, and civic duties, helping stabilize economic life. The expansion of towns also strengthened the church. Cathedrals and monasteries became prominent landmarks, attracting pilgrims, scholars, and clergy. The cathedral at Lund, for instance, emerged as a key religious center. When the Archbishopric of Lund was established, it gave the Scandinavian Church its own leadership, separate from German oversight. This development signaled Denmark's growing ecclesiastical confidence. The Church became one of the kingdom's largest landowners, and its officials played major roles in politics, diplomacy, and cultural life. Meanwhile, the Danish nobility continued to refine its role in governance. Noble families controlled large estates, provided military support to the king, and participated in regional councils. Their power rested on land ownership and hereditary privilege. In return for their loyalty, kings granted them rights and exemptions that reinforced their influence. The relationship between monarchy and nobility shifted over time, sometimes harmonious and sometimes tense. Still, the structure of medieval Danish society relied on this balance between royal authority and noble privilege. One of the most significant developments of this era was Denmark's expansion beyond its early medieval borders. Danish rulers extended their influence into regions across the Baltic. They engaged in conflicts, alliances, and conquests that shaped the political landscape of Northern Europe. Control of strategic coastal areas strengthened Denmark's economic position, especially in relation to trade across the Baltic Sea. This expansion often brought Denmark into contact and conflict with other powers, including the Holy Roman Empire to the south and emerging Swedish and Norwegian kingdoms to the north. By this time, the Scandinavian world was no longer dominated by loosely organized Viking groups. Instead, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were developing into structured monarchies with increasingly defined territories. These neighbors frequently competed for control of key regions such as Scania, Halland, and Blekinge. Their ambitions sometimes overlapped, creating cycles of conflict and negotiation. Within Denmark, royal succession remained a source of instability. Medieval kings were not always succeeded by their eldest sons. Danish succession practices allowed noble assemblies to influence the selection of kings, which sometimes led to power struggles. Disputes over succession occasionally weakened the monarchy, allowing rival factions to challenge royal authority. These conflicts often required careful diplomacy, as kings sought to maintain unity while navigating noble expectations. Amid these shifting dynamics, a remarkable figure emerged, Queen Margrethe, later known as Margrethe I. She played a central role in shaping the later medieval period and the creation of the Kalmar Union. Margrethe, the daughter of King Valdemar Atterdag, displayed political skill at a time when female rulers were rare. Through strategic marriages and alliances, she positioned herself as a powerful leader in Scandinavia. Margrethe's rise began when she married the Norwegian king. Their son inherited claims to both Denmark and Norway, creating an opportunity for union between the two kingdoms. After the deaths of her husband and son, Margrethe maneuvered to secure her own authority. She gained recognition in Denmark and Norway as a regent, ruling on behalf of new monarchs while effectively controlling governance. Her leadership was marked by careful diplomacy, firm administration, and efforts to stabilize finances after periods of conflict. Her influence extended into Sweden as well, where dissatisfaction with local rulers created an opening for her intervention. Swedish nobles, frustrated with their own king, invited Margrethe's involvement. Through a combination of military and political pressure, she succeeded in gaining control over Sweden, completing what became the Kalmar Union. In the late medieval era, the Kalmar Union formally united Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single monarch. The union was named after the town where it was signed and represented one of the most ambitious political projects in medieval Northern Europe. It aimed to create a unified Scandinavian realm capable of resisting external threats, particularly from powerful German trading interests and the Hanseatic League. The Kalmar Union did not erase the identities of the three kingdoms. Each retained its own laws, customs, and local administrations. But Margrethe envisioned a unified foreign policy and shared defense. The idea was to strengthen Scandinavian independence by combining resources and avoiding destructive internal conflicts. Under Margrethe's leadership, the union functioned with relative stability. Her political skill allowed her to manage rivalries between nobles in each kingdom while maintaining overall coherence. She appointed officials carefully, balanced regional interests, and pursued policies that benefited trade and security. Margrethe's reign is often remembered as one of the most effective in Scandinavian history. However, the union contained internal tensions that would become more visible after her death. The three kingdoms had different economic priorities. Danish interests were centered on the Baltic trade and control of southern Scandinavian territories. Norwegian interests focused on maritime routes and maintaining influence in the North Atlantic. Swedish nobles sought autonomy and often resisted Danish influence. These competing agendas simmered beneath the surface of the Union. The relationship between Denmark and the Hanseatic League was another source of tension. The Hanseatic League, a powerful network of German trading cities, dominated commerce in the Baltic. Danish and Hanseatic interests frequently clashed over trade routes, tariffs, and control of ports. The Union strengthened Denmark's hand in these conflicts, but the economic pressures added to political strain. Even with these challenges, the Kalmar Union represented a major milestone. It showed that Scandinavian states recognized the need for cooperation in a world dominated by stronger European powers. The Union also underscored Denmark's central role in regional politics. By hosting the Union's central administration and providing many of its monarchs, Denmark became the leading force within the alliance. Culturally, the medieval period brought growth in literacy, law, and artistic expression. Christian monasteries produced manuscripts, chroniclers recorded historical events, and churches displayed elaborate carvings and frescoes. Danish scholars and clergy engaged with theological and intellectual currents from across Europe. The spread of written Danish developed slowly, but Latin remained the primary language of administration and scholarship. When the Kalmar Union was first established under the leadership of Queen Margrethe I, it appeared to offer a solution to many of Scandinavia's enduring challenges. By uniting Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single monarch, the Union promised coordinated defense, stronger trade networks, and a united front against the influence of powerful German cities and other European rivals. Yet the very diversity that made the Union valuable also made it fragile. As the 15th century unfolded, competing interests, regional rivalries, and political disagreements gradually strained the bonds that held the three kingdoms together. The period that followed reveals how these tensions deepened, ultimately leading to Sweden's break from the Union and reshaping the political landscape of Northern Europe. The first major source of strain within the Kalmar Union arose from its structure. Although the three realms shared a monarch, they maintained separate laws, customs, and governing bodies. Danish rulers, serving as the main unifying force, often tried to strengthen central authority in ways that Swedish and Norwegian nobles viewed as threats to their regional autonomy. In Denmark, the crown's administrative system was more developed, and the monarchy had more experience balancing noble power. In Sweden, by contrast, the nobility was accustomed to a high degree of independence, especially in the large estates and mining regions that made the kingdom economically significant. This imbalance shaped the political disputes that soon emerged. Danish monarchs, seeking to stabilize the union and maintain security, often favored policies that strengthened royal control over trade routes and taxation. These measures were rarely welcomed in Sweden, where local elites viewed them as Danish interference. Norwegian nobles, although generally less resistant than their Swedish counterparts, also feared losing influence to Danish administrators. Each kingdom had its own priorities, and finding common ground was not always easy. The early years after Margret's death highlighted the challenges of maintaining unity. Her adopted son, King Erik of Pomerania, inherited a complex political structure that required careful management. Erik attempted to assert strong central authority, but his policies created friction. He introduced new taxes on trade passing through key Danish waterways, including the Sound between Zealand and Scania. While these tolls increased royal revenue and strengthened Denmark's economic position, they angered merchants from the Hanseatic League, the powerful network of German trading cities that dominated Baltic commerce. The Hanseatic League responded forcefully. They launched campaigns to disrupt Danish control of trade and supported local uprisings. Their involvement deepened divisions within the Union, as Swedish and Norwegian noble factions used the League's opposition to reinforce their own resistance to Danish influence. Conflicts between Erik and the League escalated into open warfare. These conflicts strained the Union's military resources and contributed to growing dissatisfaction with Erik's rule. In Sweden, opposition to Erik took a more organized form. Swedish nobles, led by prominent families such as the Sture family, began to challenge the monarch's authority openly. They claimed that Danish dominance threatened Sweden's interests, particularly its control of the vital mining district around Falun, which produced significant quantities of copper and iron. The wealth generated from these mines was essential for Sweden's economy and political independence. Any perception that Denmark sought to benefit at Sweden's expense inflamed resentment. This tension eventually led to a series of Swedish uprisings. The first major rebellion resulted in Erik's deposition as King of Sweden, though he continued to rule Denmark and Norway. A Swedish noble named Engelbrekt Engelbrektsson emerged as one of the early leaders of resistance. His movement criticized royal officials for unfair taxation and mismanagement. Engelbrekt's uprising marked one of the first major fractures in the Union and demonstrated how quickly local grievances could escalate into political crisis. Although Engelbrekt's rebellion was eventually resolved, it set a precedent for future unrest. Swedish nobles gained confidence in their ability to challenge centralized power. After Erik's removal from the Swedish throne, a succession of regents, including Karl Knutsson and members of the Sture family, guided Sweden's affairs. Each of these leaders operated with the understanding that Swedish self-governance was preferable to Danish-led union. Their regencies did not end the union entirely, but they weakened its structure and emboldened those who sought independence. In Denmark and Norway, reactions to these developments varied. Many Danish nobles supported attempts to reassert control over Sweden, believing that unity was essential for security and economic stability. Norwegian nobles, however, often found themselves caught between Danish authority and Swedish unrest. Norway retained strong ties to the Union, partly due to long-standing associations with Denmark, and partly because its own nobility was less numerous and less powerful than that of Sweden. Still, Norway felt the effects of instability as trade routes became more dangerous and conflicts disrupted economic life. The struggle to maintain the Union continued into the reign of King Christian I, founder of the Oldenburg dynasty that would rule Denmark for centuries. Christian faced the challenge of restoring stability across the three kingdoms. He attempted diplomatic reconciliation with Swedish leaders, but tensions persisted. The deeper issue remained unresolved. Danish rulers wanted a strong union led from Denmark, while Swedish nobles wanted local control with minimal Danish influence. Christian's successor, King Hans, inherited these challenges and attempted a more assertive approach. His efforts to reconsolidate the union achieved temporary success. For a brief period, Sweden returned to accepting Hans as king. But once again, resistance grew quickly, and Sweden pushed back against Danish administrative efforts. Swedish nobles rallied behind charismatic leaders who promised to protect their interests. By the time King Christian II ascended the throne, the Union was deeply unstable. Christian II is often remembered as one of the most controversial monarchs in Scandinavian history. His reputation is tied to the event known as the Stockholm Bloodbath, a massacre that occurred after he attempted to crush Swedish opposition once and for all. When Swedish nobles resisted Danish rule, Christian launched a military campaign to retake control. After capturing Stockholm, he ordered the execution of several dozens of Swedish nobles, clergy, and leading citizens. The Stockholm bloodbath shocked Sweden and permanently undermined Christian's legitimacy. What he intended as a display of strength instead provoked outrage. Rather than eliminating Swedish resistance, the massacre fueled it. Soon after, a new leader emerged who would lead Sweden to full independence, Gustav Vasa. He united Swedish forces, drove out the last Danish troops, and established Sweden as a separate kingdom with its own monarchy. This victory effectively ended the Kalmar Union's functioning as a unified political entity. Norway remained more closely linked to Denmark, continuing a dual monarchy under Danish kings. Sweden's departure marked a major shift in Scandinavian relations. Denmark could no longer claim leadership over a united northern realm. The dissolution of the Union not only redefined political borders, but also reshaped the balance of power in the region for centuries. The collapse of the Kalmar Union left Denmark with difficult questions about its future, its political structure, and its relationship to the rest of Europe. In the decades that followed, two major transformations reshaped the kingdom in ways that would define its development for centuries. The first was the Protestant Reformation, which overturned old religious institutions and brought Denmark firmly into the emerging Lutheran world of Northern Europe. The second was the rise of absolutism, a political shift that centralized authority in the hands of the monarchy and changed the balance of power between king, nobles, and common people. These changes did not simply modify Denmark's institutions, they altered the foundations of the kingdom's identity. When the Reformation began spreading across Europe, its impact reached even the far northern realms. The ideas sparked by Martin Luther found fertile ground in regions where dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church had already grown. In Denmark, as in many other countries, criticism of church wealth, clerical privileges, and foreign influence had been mounting. The church was a major landowner. Its hierarchy often operated with limited royal oversight, and many nobles resented the economic and political independence that ecclesiastical institutions enjoyed. These tensions made religious reform an attractive prospect for rulers and nobles alike. The early stages of the Reformation in Denmark were marked by debate and uncertainty. Lutheran ideas circulated through towns, monasteries, and universities. Scholars and preachers translated Luther's writings, and growing numbers of citizens questioned traditional doctrines. Yet the kingdom did not shift suddenly. Denmark's monarchy and nobility approached the matter cautiously, aware that religious change carried political consequences. The real turning point came during the reign of King Christian III. His rise to power followed a civil conflict known as the Count's Feud, a struggle rooted in the question of whether Denmark would follow a Catholic or Lutheran path. The conflict pitted supporters of the Catholic Church and certain noble factions against those who favored Lutheran reform. Christian III emerged victorious, and with his victory came the decisive establishment of Lutheranism as the official religion of Denmark. Christian III was deeply committed to Lutheran ideas. Once in full control, he moved quickly to reorganize the kingdom's religious structure. One of his first acts was to seize church lands, redistributing them to the crown and loyal nobles. This move dramatically increased royal wealth and reduced the economic power of the Catholic Church. Monasteries were dissolved, their properties transformed into administrative estates or granted to supporters of the new regime. While this process mirrored developments in other Protestant regions, its impact in Denmark was particularly profound because of the scale of church holdings. The adoption of Lutheranism involved more than confiscating land. Christian III reorganized the church's leadership, replacing bishops loyal to Rome with Lutheran superintendents who answered directly to the king. New church ordinances established the structure of worship, doctrine, and education. Lutheran pastors were trained in Reformed theology and sent to parishes to instruct the population. Latin remained important in learned circles, but religious life increasingly centered on the Danish language. Sermons, hymns, and biblical readings were delivered in words ordinary people could understand. This shift had long-lasting cultural effects. The translation of religious texts into Danish accelerated the development of the language. Hymns and religious writings circulated widely, influenced by both German and local traditions. Education, once primarily the domain of monastic institutions, gradually became more accessible as the Church promoted literacy. Over time, the Lutheran emphasis on reading scripture contributed to rising literacy rates among ordinary Danes. The Reformation also strengthened royal authority. By dismantling the independence of the Catholic Church, Christian III consolidated power within the monarchy. Religious leadership became intertwined with political governance. Clergy, now appointed under royal oversight, reinforced loyalty to the crown. The new church structures supported the creation of more uniform administrative practices across the kingdom. This centralization laid important groundwork for the next major transformation, the rise of absolute monarchy. In the centuries following the Reformation, the Danish monarchy continued to balance the interests of nobles, clergy, and emerging urban elites. Although kings held significant power, they still depended on the cooperation of noble estates, which controlled large swaths of land and maintained regional authority. Political decisions often required negotiation with the Rigsråd, a council of nobles who advised the king and limited the scope of royal authority. The relationship between crown and nobility was often tense but functional. This balance shifted dramatically in the 17th century. A series of external and internal pressures weakened noble power while strengthening the monarchy's position. Several wars with Sweden drained the kingdom's resources and exposed weaknesses in the traditional political system. Nobles, who were responsible for supplying troops, struggled to meet military demands. The crown, facing the urgent need for defense, increasingly relied on new administrative methods, standing armies, and broader taxation. King Frederick III played a decisive role in reshaping Danish governance. During a dramatic moment in the mid-17th century, he capitalized on both noble weakness and popular support to establish a new system of rule. A failed Swedish assault on Copenhagen, bravely resisted by citizens and soldiers, gave Frederick the opportunity to present himself as the protector of the kingdom. In the aftermath, the urban population and clergy sided with the king against the nobility, blaming noble leadership for earlier failures. Seizing the moment, Frederick III persuaded representatives of the estates to grant him hereditary and absolute power. The resulting political transformation established Denmark as an absolute monarchy. Under this system, the king became the supreme authority, no longer constrained by the Rigsråd or obligated to negotiate fundamental decisions with the nobility. Royal decrees carried the force of law. Administrative reforms centralized government functions, expanded bureaucratic institutions, and strengthened the standing army. Absolutism transformed the relationship between ruler and subjects. The monarchy sought to present itself as the embodiment of order and stability, guiding the kingdom with paternal authority. Kings viewed themselves as responsible for the welfare of the state, and their court culture adopted elements from other European absolute rulers. Royal ceremonies, architecture, and artistic patronage were used to display power and reinforce legitimacy. Copenhagen, the capital, benefited from this period of centralization as it grew into a more prominent administrative and cultural center. The rise of absolutism also influenced economic life. The crown gained direct control over many revenue sources, including taxes and former church lands. New state institutions oversaw trade, agriculture, and military organization. The government supported the development of new industries, encouraged mercantilist policies, and sought to increase national wealth through tighter regulation of commerce. While these initiatives had mixed success, they reflected a growing ambition to shape the economy through coordinated planning. Culturally, the era of absolutism saw changes in education, literature, and religious life. The Lutheran Church remained closely tied to the state, with clergy often serving as local administrators. Schools expanded gradually, though education remained uneven across regions. Intellectual life became more connected to broader European currents, especially through the influence of universities and imported texts. The monarchy's patronage of the arts contributed to the emergence of Danish cultural figures, though true cultural flowering would come in later centuries. The 17th century marked one of the most turbulent and consequential eras in Danish history. After the Reformation and the rise of absolutism, Denmark entered this century with ambitions of maintaining its status as a leading Northern European power. Yet the kingdom soon found itself locked in a prolonged and often devastating rivalry with Sweden. This rivalry, rooted in geographical tensions and competing political visions, escalated into a series of wars that fundamentally reshaped the balance of power in Scandinavia. The conflicts of this period not only cost Denmark valuable territories but also forced the kingdom to rethink its place in the region. The roots of Danish-Swedish conflict stretched back centuries, but the rivalry intensified dramatically as Sweden emerged from the shadow of the collapsed Kalmar Union. Once part of a shared political structure with Denmark, Sweden now forged its own path, developing into a militant, expansionist state determined to assert dominance around the Baltic Sea. Sweden's transformation accelerated under leaders like Gustavus Adolphus, who modernized the Swedish military and expanded the kingdom's influence through successful campaigns during the 30 Years' War. Meanwhile, Denmark also sought to assert its authority across the Baltic. Danish kings controlled key waterways, such as the Sound, collecting tolls from passing ships and benefiting from lucrative maritime trade. These revenues bolstered the crown's finances and helped maintain Denmark's regional standing. But Swedish leaders viewed Danish control of trade routes as a barrier to their own ambitions. The Baltic region became a theater of competing national goals, each kingdom striving to secure military and economic advantages. The first major clash of the 17th century occurred during what is known as the Kalmar War. This conflict emerged in part from disputes over northern Norway and the vital Finnmark coast, where control of fisheries and trade routes held great significance. Danish forces initially fought with confidence, believing their naval strength and strategic territories would ensure success. Yet the conflict revealed that Sweden, now under the leadership of King Charles IX and later Gustavus Adolphus, had become a formidable adversary. The war ended without dramatic territorial changes, but it underscored the rising Swedish challenge. Tensions continued to rise as Sweden gained influence in northern Germany, participating in major European conflicts and earning a reputation for military innovation. Denmark, seeking to maintain balance in the region, cautiously monitored these developments. King Christian IV, one of Denmark's most energetic and ambitious monarchs, entered the 30 Years' War with hopes of strengthening Danish influence in northern Germany. He envisioned Denmark as a defender of Protestant interests and as a kingdom capable of limiting Swedish power. Christian IV's involvement, however, did not go as planned. Danish forces suffered significant defeats against the armies of the Holy Roman Empire, led by generals such as Albrecht von Wallenstein. Though these losses were not directly connected to Sweden, they weakened Denmark at a critical moment. As the conflict progressed, Sweden entered the fray and achieved victories that elevated its international standing. When Christian IV withdrew from the war, Denmark's influence in northern Germany diminished, while Sweden emerged stronger. The shifting balance of power set the stage for the next major confrontation, the Torstensson War. During this conflict, Swedish armies conducted aggressive campaigns that penetrated deep into Danish territory. The war culminated in a treaty that forced Denmark to make concessions and acknowledge Sweden's growing dominance. Although Denmark retained control of the Sound toll, the war signaled a clear change in Scandinavian hierarchy. Denmark's most devastating losses came during the wars that followed in the later 17th century, particularly during the conflicts associated with King Charles X of Sweden. Charles X was determined to weaken Denmark decisively, believing that crippling Danish power would secure Swedish dominance in the Baltic region. His campaigns were marked by bold maneuvers, including the famous crossing of the frozen belts, an unexpected and daring winter march that allowed Swedish forces to bypass natural defenses and strike deep into Danish territory. This dramatic military feat forced Denmark into the Treaty of Roskilde, one of the most consequential agreements in Scandinavian history. Under the terms of this treaty, Denmark ceded large territories to Sweden. Among these were the provinces of Skåne, Halland, and Blekinge, regions that had been integral parts of the Danish realm for centuries. Skåne, in particular, held immense symbolic and strategic significance. Its fertile lands, cultural heritage, and historical ties to the Danish monarchy made its loss a profound national trauma. The cession of these provinces marked a turning point. Denmark was no longer the dominant Scandinavian power. The shock of Roskilde reverberated throughout Danish society. The Danish population had long viewed the southern provinces as central to their identity. Losing them not only weakened the kingdom territorially, but also undermined the monarchy's authority. Although Denmark attempted to regain the lost provinces in subsequent conflicts, none of these efforts succeeded. Sweden consolidated control over its new territories through administrative reforms, language policies, and military presence, reshaping the cultural landscape over time. Despite the setbacks of Roskilde, Denmark did not collapse. In fact, the kingdom managed to resist complete subjugation during later phases of the war. When Charles X launched renewed assaults on Denmark, including attempts to capture Copenhagen, Danish forces rallied with the support of Dutch naval allies. The successful defense of Copenhagen restored a measure of national pride and demonstrated that Denmark remained capable of resilience even in the face of severe challenges. Still, the long-term consequences were clear. Sweden had emerged as the preeminent power in Northern Europe, controlling vast territories around the Baltic Sea. Denmark, once the dominant force in Scandinavia, now found itself in a diminished position. The wars of the 17th century forced Danish rulers and administrators to reconsider their priorities. The focus shifted from expansive ambitions to internal stability and careful management of remaining territories. In the wake of these conflicts, Denmark undertook administrative and military reforms to strengthen the state. The rise of absolutism, discussed in the previous section, was partly motivated by the need for more efficient governance in response to wartime pressures. A more centralized government allowed for better coordination of resources, improved taxation systems, and stronger defenses. The Danish army and navy were reorganized to prevent future disasters like the rapid Swedish invasions. Economic changes also followed. With the loss of southern provinces, Denmark redirected its economic strategies toward improving agriculture, trade, and royal administration. Though the kingdom no longer controlled as many Baltic territories, it retained a strong maritime tradition. Trade across the Sound continued to provide income, and Copenhagen grew in importance as a commercial center. After the devastating wars with Sweden and the loss of important territories, Denmark entered a period of introspection and rebuilding. The kingdom, no longer a dominant military power in Northern Europe, turned its attention inward. Instead of expanding through force, Denmark began reshaping itself through ideas, innovation, and gradual reforms. The period often associated with the Enlightenment brought new ways of thinking about society, governance, and the natural world. These ideas influenced Danish intellectuals, administrators, and landowners, ultimately leading to some of the most important agricultural and social transformations in the nation's history. The Enlightenment reached Denmark through a variety of channels, including translated books, correspondence with foreign scholars, and the influence of European universities. Danish students traveled abroad to study philosophy, natural science, and political theory. When they returned home, they brought with them a broader perspective on rational inquiry and human progress. The Enlightenment did not arrive as a dramatic revolution. Rather, it seeped into Danish society gradually, shaping decisions in education, governance, and agricultural policy. One of the most significant areas influenced by Enlightenment thinking was agriculture. For centuries, Denmark's rural economy had operated under a system in which peasants worked land owned by nobles, the crown, or large estates. Fields were often managed collectively, and traditional methods limited productivity. As Enlightenment ideas encouraged observation, experimentation, and rational improvement, Danish thinkers began to examine how these principles could be applied to the countryside. Several landowners and reform-minded officials recognized that the future prosperity of Denmark depended on improving agricultural output. They began introducing new crop rotations, better tools, and scientific approaches to farming. While these innovations were important, the most transformative changes came from structural reforms in land ownership and rural organization. One of the most influential developments of this period was the agricultural reform movement that unfolded over several decades. Central to this movement was the transition from shared field systems to individual land holdings. The old common field system had been rooted in medieval traditions where entire villages cultivated scattered strips of land collectively. This arrangement provided stability but limited incentives for individual farmers to innovate. Reformers argued that Denmark could increase productivity by consolidating scattered plots into unified farms under the control of individual households. This process, known as enclosure, required reorganizing entire villages, redrawing boundaries, and redistributing land. Although the reforms were gradual and varied by region, they changed the landscape of rural Denmark. Farms became more efficient, and peasants gained greater responsibility over their own land. At the same time, legal reforms offered peasants more security. In earlier centuries, many peasants had been bound to estates, limited in their ability to move or change occupations. Enlightenment-influenced reformers saw this system as outdated and economically restrictive. Over time, Denmark implemented changes that reduced the obligations of peasants and expanded their rights. By granting peasants more freedom and a greater stake in their land, the reforms encouraged improved productivity and long-term planning. Education also played a central role in the Enlightenment-era transformation. Danish thinkers increasingly argued that a prosperous society required knowledgeable citizens. Schools expanded slowly but steadily, especially in rural areas. The Lutheran Church, which had long been responsible for basic education, supported these efforts by emphasizing literacy so that individuals could read religious texts. Enlightenment values deepened this focus on learning, introducing subjects such as mathematics, natural science, and geography. The period also saw the rise of institutions dedicated to scientific advancement. Natural scientists in Denmark conducted studies on plants, animals, and climate, often collaborating with foreign scholars. Their work contributed to a growing understanding of how to improve farming and manage natural resources. The monarchy supported some of these efforts, recognizing that scientific progress could enhance the strength of the kingdom. While rural reforms shaped the countryside, cities also experienced change. Copenhagen grew as an administrative and intellectual center. Printing presses produced newspapers, pamphlets, and books that circulated new ideas among urban readers. Writers and scholars discussed government, human rights, and social inequalities. These debates did not immediately transform political structures, but they expanded the intellectual horizons of those involved in governance. The Enlightenment also influenced the development of Danish legal systems. Existing laws were examined, debated, and gradually updated to reflect new ideas about justice and fairness. These reforms did not eliminate all inequalities, but they helped modernize the legal framework of the kingdom. Courts became more professionalized, and legal procedures became more standardized. Importantly, the period saw increasing attention to the welfare of the population. Although the modern welfare state was still far in the future, Enlightenment principles encouraged early forms of social concern. Officials collected data on population size, health, and living conditions, seeking ways to address issues such as poverty and disease. The state's involvement in these matters marked a shift toward more active governance. Cultural life flourished during this era as well. Danish writers, artists, and thinkers contributed to a growing national consciousness. Literature began to explore themes of identity, morality, and social improvement. The performing arts, including theater and music, gained new prominence in Copenhagen. These cultural developments helped shape a shared sense of belonging among Danes, even as the country adjusted to its reduced political influence. The Enlightenment period also deepened Denmark's engagement with the broader world. Danish scholars corresponded with foreign intellectuals, and Danish merchants expanded their trade networks. Although Denmark no longer sought territorial expansion in Scandinavia, the kingdom maintained overseas interests, including colonies in the Caribbean and trading posts in West Africa and India. These activities reflected the complexities of global trade during the period and connected Denmark to wider economic systems. As Denmark entered the closing decades of the 18th century, the kingdom found itself in a world undergoing rapid and unpredictable transformation. The Enlightenment had encouraged new ways of thinking, agricultural reforms had reshaped the countryside, and Danish society was gradually modernizing. Yet these internal developments could not shield Denmark from the storms gathering across Europe. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, the conflicts between great powers, and the shifting alliances of the era would draw Denmark into events far beyond its control. The consequences would be profound, leading to one of the most significant territorial losses in Danish history, the separation of Norway. At the outset of the Napoleonic period, Denmark hoped to maintain neutrality. The kingdom had long benefited from avoiding deep entanglement in major European conflicts. Its strategic location at the entrance to the Baltic Sea allowed it to profit from international trade, especially through the tolls collected in the Sound. Danish merchants carried goods between nations at war, and Danish ships sailed with relative safety under a neutral flag. This policy of neutrality served both economic and political interests, allowing Denmark to maintain stability while larger empires clashed. However, neutrality became increasingly difficult to uphold. As the conflict between Britain and France escalated, both sides sought to control or disrupt the trade routes passing through Danish waters. France, under Napoleon's leadership, imposed the continental system, a blockade aimed at weakening Britain by restricting its trade with Europe. Britain responded with its own naval strategies, determined to prevent any limitations on its maritime dominance. Denmark's position became precarious, caught between two powerful empires demanding cooperation and threatening retaliation. Britain, in particular, grew concerned about the possibility that Napoleon might force Denmark into an alliance against British interests. The fear intensified because Denmark possessed a significant navy, one that could be a valuable asset if it fell under French control. British leaders concluded that they could not afford to take this risk. Their solution was drastic. They decided to preemptively strike Copenhagen and seize the Danish fleet to prevent it from being used against them. In an event that shocked Europe, British forces launched a massive attack on Copenhagen. The bombardment, carried out with overwhelming naval power, caused severe destruction. Fires spread through the city, civilians suffered casualties, and the Danish navy was ultimately captured and taken to Britain. The attack was justified by British leaders as a necessary defensive measure. But to the Danish people, it was an act of violation against a neutral nation. The bombardment of Copenhagen marked a turning point. Faced with the loss of its fleet and forced into the conflict, Denmark allied itself with Napoleon. Once Denmark joined Napoleon's side, it became a target for Britain and its allies. The kingdom's economy suffered under the pressures of war and blockade. Trade routes were disrupted, and Danish merchants could no longer rely on the protection of neutrality. The alliance with France also placed Denmark in a strategically risky position. As Napoleon's fortunes declined across Europe, Denmark faced increasing vulnerability. The situation became even more complicated because Denmark and Norway were still united under a single monarch, forming what was known as the Danish-Norwegian Kingdom. While Denmark suffered from British attacks and the disruption of trade, Norway faced severe shortages. The British blockade cut off essential supplies, causing widespread hunger and hardship. The Norwegian economy, dependent on imports of grain and other necessities, was particularly affected. Although Denmark and Norway shared a king, their experiences during the war diverged significantly, contributing to rising tensions within the dual realm. As the Napoleonic Wars neared their end, the European powers gathered to reshape the political map of the continent. Denmark, aligned with the losing side, found itself in a weakened negotiating position. The major powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, sought to punish those who had supported Napoleon and reward those who had opposed him. In this new diplomatic landscape, the future of Norway became a central issue. Norway had long held a distinctive identity within the Danish-Norwegian Union. Its population, resources, and geography made it a valuable territory. Sweden, which had lost Finland to Russia earlier in the wars, now sought compensation. Swedish leaders, supported by the great powers, argued that acquiring Norway would restore balance in the region. For Denmark, this demand represented an enormous blow, one that threatened the very structure of the kingdom. Despite Danish resistance, the European powers insisted on transferring Norway to Sweden. The resulting agreement, known as the Treaty of Kiel, forced Denmark to cede Norway to the Swedish crown. This treaty marked one of the deepest traumas in Danish history. The separation of Norway ended a centuries-long union and dramatically reduced the size and influence of the Danish kingdom. Denmark retained its smaller North Atlantic possessions, Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. But its Scandinavian union was broken. Norwegians, however, did not accept the transfer quietly. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals and growing nationalist sentiment, Norwegian leaders declared independence and adopted their own constitution. Their effort to remain independent was short-lived as Swedish forces moved to enforce the terms of the treaty. After a brief conflict, Norway agreed to enter a union with Sweden, but on terms that preserved substantial internal autonomy. Thus, the Napoleonic settlement reshaped Scandinavia, weakening Denmark and strengthening Sweden, albeit in a new form. For Denmark, the aftermath of the war required both adaptation and rebuilding. The kingdom faced an economic crisis. The loss of trade opportunities, combined with wartime destruction and the expenses of defense, had depleted royal finances. Inflation surged, and the monetary system collapsed into instability. The government eventually introduced new currency reforms to restore financial order, demonstrating the need for careful management in the post-war era. Yet Denmark also discovered opportunities for renewal. With its former ambitions curtailed, the kingdom began focusing on internal development. Cultural and economic efforts gained new importance. Danish agriculture, already transformed by reforms in the previous century, continued to advance. Rural life became more stable as land reforms progressed and peasant rights expanded. The reduced size of the kingdom made administration more manageable, allowing for greater attention to social and economic improvement. Urban centers also adapted to post-war realities. Copenhagen, despite the destruction it had suffered, remained the cultural and administrative heart of the kingdom. Reconstruction efforts modernized parts of the city, and intellectual life continued to flourish. Danish thinkers, artists, and scientists contributed to what would later be recognized as a cultural golden age. Instead of seeking power through territorial expansion, Denmark increasingly shaped its identity through culture, education, and social development. The loss of Norway and the aftermath of the Napoleonic era forced Denmark to confront profound questions about its future. The kingdom had emerged from the continental upheavals, smaller, economically strained, and politically shaken. Yet, in the decades that followed, Denmark embarked on one of the most important transformations in its history, the shift from absolute monarchy to constitutional government. This change was neither sudden nor easy. It evolved through debate, social pressure, and the influence of broader European movements. Ultimately, it created the foundations of modern Danish democracy. In the early 19th century, absolute monarchy in Denmark was still firmly established. Since the reforms of King Frederik III in the 17th century, the Danish king had held broad and unquestioned authority. Royal decrees carried the force of law, and the monarchy managed administration, military affairs, and taxation. While absolutism had originally offered stability, By the 19th century, it faced growing criticism. Across Europe, new political ideas emphasized individual rights, civic participation, and limits on governmental power. Denmark was not immune to these intellectual currents. Several factors contributed to rising pressure for reform. The economic challenges that followed the Napoleonic era highlighted the need for more responsive governance. Inflation, unemployment, and loss of trade demanded careful management. Many citizens believed that broader representation in decision-making would lead to better outcomes. At the same time, a growing middle class, educated professionals, merchants, and farmers began asserting itself in public debates. These groups valued education, Enlightenment ideals, and economic opportunity. They also sought political influence that matched their rising social status. Another important factor was the cultural awakening known as the Danish Golden Age. During this period, writers, philosophers, and scientists contributed to a flourishing intellectual environment. Although their work ranged widely, from literature and art to theology and philosophy, many participated in discussions about national identity, citizenship, and the proper role of government. Their ideas did not directly overthrow absolutism, but they helped create a climate in which political reform became increasingly conceivable. The first significant steps toward change came under the reign of King Frederick VI. Although he ruled as an absolute monarch, he supported limited reforms. Local advisory councils were established in rural districts and towns. These councils did not possess legislative authority, but they provided a platform for citizens to express concerns and participate in discussions about local administration. This early experiment in representative governance laid groundwork for future developments by familiarizing people with civic engagement. The movement for broader reform gained momentum during the reign of King Christian VIII. A thoughtful and well-educated monarch, Christian VIII recognized that absolutism was facing rising opposition. He initiated discussions about creating a new constitution but hesitated to implement sweeping changes. His caution stemmed partly from concerns about preserving stability and partly from the complex political situation in the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. These duchies, located to the south of the Danish kingdom, were subject to the Danish crown, but were home to mixed Danish and German-speaking populations. Throughout the early 19th century, tensions grew as national identities sharpened across Europe. German nationalism influenced the duchies, generating disputes over language rights, political autonomy, and the nature of their relationship to Denmark. Any constitutional reform in Denmark would inevitably affect the duchies, where local elites and German nationalists favored ties to the German Confederation. This complicated the king's efforts to craft reforms acceptable to all sides. The turning point came during the wave of revolutions that swept across Europe in the year known as 1848. Inspired by events in Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and other cities, large groups across Europe demanded political rights, constitutional government, and greater social freedoms. Denmark, though not engulfed in violent revolution, was deeply affected by this continental upheaval. Citizens gathered in public squares, signed petitions, and pressed for democratic reform. The pressure became too strong for the monarchy to ignore. King Frederick VII, who had ascended the throne in the same year, played a crucial role in Denmark's transition. Unlike his predecessors, he was more inclined toward reform and more receptive to public sentiment. He recognized that attempting to preserve absolutism would only worsen tensions. In a decisive move, he agreed to abolish absolute monarchy and to introduce a constitutional system. This decision was met with widespread approval and is often seen as one of the most important acts of his reign. A constitutional assembly was convened to draft the new framework of governance. The assembly brought together representatives from across the kingdom, including nobles, urban professionals, and rural farmers. Their debates were lively and reflected differing visions for Denmark's future. Some argued for strong parliamentary authority, while others favored maintaining significant royal influence. Questions about individual rights, voting systems, and the balance between local and national authority were central to the discussions. The result of their work was the Danish constitution, known as the Grundloven, Signed in the spring of 1849, the Constitution established Denmark as a constitutional monarchy. It guaranteed civil liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and protection of private property. It created a bicameral parliament with one chamber elected directly by citizens and another composed of appointed or indirectly chosen members. While voting rights were initially limited to adult men who met certain economic qualifications, the establishment of representative government marked a dramatic departure from the old order. The Grundloven also defined the separation of powers between the king and the parliament. The monarchy retained executive authority, but laws required parliamentary approval. Ministers became accountable to parliament, meaning that the government's survival depended on maintaining political support rather than simply following royal directives. Although the constitutional system would evolve significantly over time, eventually expanding voting rights and reducing royal power, 1849 marked the beginning of a democratic tradition that continues to define Denmark. The transition to constitutional rule did not end Denmark's political challenges. The duchies of Schleswig and Holstein became a focal point of conflict almost immediately. As national tensions rose, leaders in the duchies sought independence from Denmark and alignment with the German Confederation. Denmark's attempt to integrate Schleswig more fully into the kingdom triggered armed conflict known as the First Schleswig War. This conflict, fought between Danish forces and a coalition of duchy rebels supported by German states, tested the young constitutional system. Although Denmark ultimately prevailed in this first conflict, the underlying issues remained unresolved. The duchies continued to strain relations between Denmark and the German states, setting the stage for a more devastating conflict in the following decades. Nevertheless, the establishment of constitutional governance provided Denmark with the political framework to navigate these challenges. Culturally, the shift from absolutism to constitutionalism encouraged broader participation in public life. Newspapers expanded rapidly, and political associations formed across the kingdom. Citizens engaged in debates about national identity, economic development, and social progress. The new political environment fostered a sense of shared responsibility for the kingdom's future. The establishment of constitutional government in Denmark created a new political landscape, but it did not resolve one of the most complex and emotionally charged issues facing the kingdom: the fate of Schleswig and Holstein. These duchies, lying directly south of the Danish heartland, held mixed populations and carried deep historical ties to both Danish and German cultures. Their uncertain status had troubled Danish politics for decades, and the rise of nationalism across Europe only intensified the debate. As Denmark transitioned toward democracy, the Schleswig question became the defining struggle of the mid-19th century. What followed were two wars that reshaped Denmark's borders and left a lasting imprint on national identity. To understand the conflict, it is essential to recognize the unique nature of the duchies. Schleswig and Holstein were ruled by the Danish king, but they were not fully integrated into the kingdom. Schleswig had long-standing historical ties to Denmark, with both Danish-speaking and German-speaking communities. Holstein, by contrast, was culturally and politically German, belonging to the German Confederation. For centuries, Danish kings had governed the duchies in personal union, meaning the king ruled the territories but did not merge them into the kingdom. This arrangement worked under absolutism, when royal authority allowed the monarch to maintain unity despite linguistic and cultural differences. The rise of nationalism made this delicate structure far more difficult to sustain. Across Europe, people began asserting their right to self-determination based on shared language and culture. In the duchies, German nationalism grew rapidly, especially among elites in Holstein and the southern parts of Schleswig. They feared that Denmark's constitutional reforms might eventually lead to the full incorporation of Schleswig into the Danish state, weakening German influence. At the same time, Danish nationalists argued that Schleswig belonged naturally to Denmark, pointing to historical connections and the presence of Danish-speaking communities. These competing visions clashed when Denmark began discussing how to implement a new constitution for the entire realm. Many Danish nationalists advocated a policy known as the Eider boundary idea, named after the Eider River, which marked the southern historical limit of Danish territory. Under this principle, Schleswig should be part of Denmark, while Holstein, being clearly German, would remain separate. German nationalists opposed this plan fiercely, insisting that Schleswig and Holstein must remain united. Their slogan, Up ewig ungedeelt, meaning forever undivided, captured their determination to keep the duchies together under German influence. The tension finally erupted into open conflict with the First Schleswig War. When Danish leaders attempted to implement the Eider boundary principle, German nationalists in the duchies rebelled, forming a provisional government supported by several German states. Denmark found itself facing not only local resistance, but also intervention from powerful German allies, such as Prussia. The conflict tested the young Danish constitutional state, which had only recently established its new political framework. Despite being smaller and less militarily prepared, Denmark fought with determination. Danish forces experienced both victories and setbacks, but after years of conflict and complicated diplomatic negotiations, the war ended with Denmark retaining control of Schleswig. Holstein remained tied to the German Confederation, yet this outcome solved little. The core dispute, whether Schleswig should be Danish or German, remained unresolved. The First Schleswig War ended with a fragile peace, more of a pause than a settlement. During the years that followed, the political situation grew even more complicated. Denmark remained committed to integrating Schleswig more closely with the kingdom, motivated by national pride and political necessity. Danish governments introduced policies to strengthen Danish administration and cultural influence in the duchy. German leaders interpreted these actions as provocative. Meanwhile, Prussia and Austria, two major German powers, watched the situation closely, eager to exert control in the region and expand their influence within the German Confederation. In an effort to clarify the relationship between Denmark and Schleswig, the Danish government drafted a new constitution that applied to both Denmark and Schleswig but excluded Holstein. This move was seen by German states as a violation of earlier agreements. For Danish nationalists, the constitution represented a necessary assertion of sovereignty. For German nationalists, it was an unacceptable attempt to separate Schleswig from its historical link to Holstein. When the constitution was approved, Prussia and Austria decided to act. They demanded that Denmark revoke the document. When Denmark refused, the situation escalated rapidly. Prussian and Austrian forces crossed the border into Schleswig, initiating the Second Schleswig War. This conflict placed Denmark against two of the most powerful military states in Europe. The disparity in strength was overwhelming. The war moved quickly, and Denmark found itself unable to withstand the combined might of Prussia and Austria. Danish troops fought bravely, particularly at the defensive stronghold of Dybbøl, but they were outmatched by superior artillery, better logistics, and far larger armies. The fall of Dybbøl marked a decisive turning point. Danish hopes of retaining Schleswig began to fade. International diplomacy offered little assistance. Britain and other European powers expressed sympathy for Denmark's plight but provided no military support. They viewed the conflict as part of a larger struggle within German politics, particularly between Prussia and Austria, and were unwilling to intervene. Denmark stood alone. The war ended with a treaty that forced Denmark to surrender control of both Schleswig and Holstein. These territories were placed under joint administration by Prussia and Austria. Later, after Prussia defeated Austria in a separate conflict, Prussia took full control of the duchies. Denmark's borders were pushed northward, drastically reducing the size of the kingdom. The loss of Schleswig and Holstein in the year 1864 marked a profound transformation in Danish history. It was not merely a territorial defeat, but a psychological shock. Generations of Danes had regarded Schleswig as an integral part of the nation. Losing the duchies shattered long-held ambitions of a larger Danish state. The defeat forced Denmark to confront its vulnerabilities and reconsider its position in Europe. The defeat of 1864 forced Denmark to rethink its purpose. The kingdom, now reduced in size and influence, had little choice but to rebuild from within. Instead of pursuing territorial ambition, Danes turned toward improving their society, strengthening their cultural identity, and embracing new ways of thinking about citizenship and community. What emerged from this period was a remarkable transformation, one that laid the foundations for Denmark's modern democratic and welfare traditions. In the years following the loss of Schleswig and Holstein, a widespread sense of introspection swept through the country. Many Danes believed that national renewal required more than military strength or political maneuvering. It demanded a stronger, more educated population. This belief aligned with ideas already gaining momentum among intellectuals, pastors, farmers, and reformers. They argued that Denmark needed a unified social fabric grounded in shared knowledge, civic participation, and cultural confidence. At the center of this movement stood the concept of education, not simply formal schooling, but lifelong learning and personal development. One of the most influential figures of this era was the pastor and poet N.F.S. Grundtvig, whose ideas helped shape the Danish cultural awakening. Grundtvig argued that a strong nation depended on an enlightened and active populace. He promoted the idea of the living word, emphasizing discussion, storytelling, and shared learning instead of rigid academic instruction. His vision inspired the creation of folk high schools, institutions where young adults, especially from rural areas, could study history, literature, politics, and culture in an open and engaging environment. The folk high school movement spread rapidly. These schools did not grant formal degrees. Instead, they encouraged students to develop critical thinking, personal responsibility, and a sense of belonging to a broader national community. They became hubs for cultural exchange, idealism, and democratic values. Farmers, in particular, benefited from these schools, gaining knowledge that helped them improve their livelihoods and participate in local governance. Over time, folk high schools became one of Denmark's most distinctive educational innovations, shaping generations of citizens and strengthening the democratic spirit. Alongside the rise of folk high schools came changes in primary education. The Danish state expanded schooling for children and improved teacher training. Literacy rates rose steadily, and access to education widened across rural and urban areas. Children learned not only basic skills but also Danish history, geography, and civics, fostering a deeper sense of national identity. These efforts built on earlier Lutheran emphasis on literacy, but now carried a broader civic purpose, preparing the next generation for active citizenship in a democratic society. Denmark's political structures also evolved significantly during this period. The constitutional framework established in 1849 continued to develop, shaped by debates between conservative landowners and emerging liberal groups. Political parties began to form, reflecting different social and economic interests. Among the most influential were the liberal agrarian movements, which represented the growing political power of rural communities. These groups pushed for expanded voting rights, fairer taxation, and increased local autonomy. The struggle between conservative and liberal forces became especially visible in the late 19th century, when disagreements over parliamentary authority led to periods of political tension. Yet these conflicts ultimately strengthened Denmark's commitment to democratic governance. Over time, reforms expanded voting rights, making the political system more inclusive. The introduction of parliamentary government, where the cabinet depended on the support of an elected majority, solidified democratic norms. Local democracy also grew stronger. Parish councils, municipal governments, and county assemblies gained responsibility for education, infrastructure, and social services. These institutions encouraged citizens to participate in decision-making and helped distribute power more evenly across society. Denmark was becoming a nation where civic involvement was expected, not reserved for elites. Agriculture remained central to Danish life, but new cooperative movements dramatically changed the sector. Farmers began forming cooperatives for dairies, slaughterhouses, equipment purchasing, and export marketing. These cooperatives allowed small farmers to compete in global markets by pooling resources and sharing profits. Cooperative dairies, where farmers delivered milk daily, became one of the movement's most iconic features. Butter produced through these cooperatives found markets across Europe, especially in Britain. The cooperative system reflected more than economic efficiency. It embodied the values of equality, mutual support, and shared responsibility that were becoming hallmarks of Danish society. Farmers held meetings, voted on decisions, and collectively managed their enterprises, strengthening both local democracy and economic resilience. Urban areas experienced change as well. Industrialization reached Denmark later than in some European countries, but it brought new jobs, technological advancements, and social challenges. Workers in cities gradually organized into unions to improve wages, working conditions, and political representation. These labor movements gained influence and eventually formed political alliances, contributing to the rise of the Social Democratic Party. While Denmark remained a predominantly agricultural nation during this period, the seeds of a balanced agricultural industrial economy were beginning to take root. Cultural life flourished in tandem with political and social change. Danish literature, painting, and philosophy blossomed. Writers explored themes of identity, morality, and national renewal. Painters depicted rural life with empathy and detail, reinforcing a shared sense of belonging. Intellectuals debated the meaning of democracy, citizenship, and culture. This cultural flowering strengthened Denmark's confidence as a nation capable of defining its own future despite its reduced borders. Religion also evolved. The Lutheran Church remained central to Danish life, but it increasingly embraced a more inclusive and community-oriented role. Pastors contributed to local education, cultural life, and moral guidance. Religious identity became closely intertwined with national identity, yet the Church supported broader values of tolerance, charity, and social responsibility. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, Denmark's society was defined by participation, cooperation, and growing equality. These values laid the foundation for what would later become the Danish welfare state, a system rooted not in sudden revolution, but in gradual cultural and social evolution. The welfare idea began to take shape during this era. While comprehensive welfare policies would not fully emerge until the 20th century, the underlying principles were already visible. Local communities provided support for the poor, hospitals improved care, and charitable organizations expanded their reach. The state started offering limited pensions and assistance, recognizing that social responsibility could not rest solely on families or churches. The belief that society should care for its most vulnerable members gained moral and political strength. As the 20th century approached, Denmark had undergone a significant transformation. From a kingdom defined by territorial losses and shifting political structures, it had evolved into a society grounded in education, cooperation, and democratic engagement. These strengths served the country well, but they would soon be tested by the upheavals of global conflict. The two world wars brought challenges that reshaped Danish foreign policy, national identity, and moral responsibility. Through neutrality, occupation, resistance, and reconstruction, Denmark navigated some of the most turbulent decades in modern history. When the First World War erupted, Europe was drawn into a massive conflict, unlike anything seen before. Great powers mobilized armies across the continent. Alliances shifted rapidly, and millions of lives were lost. Denmark, however, chose a path of neutrality. The government recognized that the kingdom was too small and too vulnerable to survive participation in a war dominated by militarized empires. Remaining neutral was both a practical necessity and a reflection of Denmark's cautious approach to international affairs following centuries of conflict. Neutrality during the First World War required careful diplomacy. Denmark needed to maintain balanced relations with both the Allied and Central Powers. The government implemented strict policies to ensure that Danish ports, trade routes, and industries did not favor one side over the other. Although neutrality protected Denmark from direct military involvement, it did not shield the country from economic disruption. Trade slowed, essential goods became scarce, and the population faced hardships related to food shortages and inflation. Nevertheless, Denmark succeeded in avoiding devastation. By the time the war ended, the kingdom had preserved its stability, even gaining the opportunity to resolve a long-standing territorial issue through peaceful means. After the war, the future of northern Schleswig, lost in the years after the 1864 defeat, came into question. With the collapse of the German Empire, the victorious Allied powers supported the principle of self-determination. A plebiscite was held in the region, allowing residents to vote on whether they wished to join Denmark or remain part of Germany. The vote restored northern Schleswig to Danish control, a rare instance in which national borders were adjusted peacefully in a period otherwise marked by turmoil. This restoration strengthened Danish national pride and symbolized the success of patience and diplomacy over military force. The interwar years brought both progress and tension. Denmark continued to expand its welfare ideas, improve education, and strengthen democratic institutions. The economy experienced periods of growth, especially in agriculture and industry. At the same time, political extremism increased across Europe. Fascist movements grew in several countries, and the rising power of Nazi Germany alarmed many Danes. Although Denmark continued to follow a policy of neutrality, it could not ignore the growing instability around it. The outbreak of the Second World War presented Denmark with challenges far more severe than those it had faced in the earlier conflict. In the spring of 1940, German forces launched a rapid campaign across northern Europe. Denmark's strategic location made it an important target for Germany, which sought control over the North Sea and access to Norway. When German troops crossed the Danish border, the government faced a difficult decision. The Danish military was small and poorly equipped compared to the German war machine. Resistance would likely lead to heavy casualties and the destruction of cities. The Danish government chose to surrender within hours of the invasion, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Germany agreed to allow the Danish monarchy and government to continue functioning, creating a unique arrangement in which Denmark remained occupied but retained a degree of internal autonomy. This compromise was controversial, yet many Danes viewed it as the only viable way to protect the population from the worst horrors of war. Daily life continued under occupation, though always under the watchful eyes of German authorities. For several years, Denmark managed to maintain a precarious balance. The government cooperated with German demands in order to preserve stability, and most institutions continued operating. Schools remained open, businesses functioned, and cultural life persisted in muted form. Yet, beneath the surface, resentment grew. Many Danes were uncomfortable with the idea of cooperating with an occupying power, especially one associated with oppression, violence, and anti-Semitism. One of the most remarkable chapters of this period involved Denmark's Jewish community. For much of the occupation, the German authorities refrained from implementing harsh anti-Semitic policies in Denmark, partly because the Danish government insisted on equal treatment for all citizens. However, as the war turned against Germany and Danish cooperation eroded, the Germans planned to deport Danish Jews. When news of the impending deportations reached Danish resistance members and ordinary citizens, they launched a nationwide rescue effort. In a matter of days, fishermen and volunteers ferried the vast majority of Denmark's Jewish population to safety in neutral Sweden. This extraordinary act of solidarity became one of the defining moral moments in Danish history. By the latter part of the war, German control over Denmark weakened. The Danish government's initial cooperation gradually gave way to protests, labor strikes, and open resistance. Sabotage operations increased, targeting factories, railways, and communication systems used to support the German war effort. Resistance groups formed networks that included students, intellectuals, workers, and even former soldiers. Their activities carried enormous risk, as German reprisals were often severe. Nonetheless, resistance grew stronger as the war progressed. In response to escalating unrest, Germany abolished Denmark's limited autonomy and imposed direct military rule. Conditions worsened, shortages increased, and daily life became more dangerous. Yet, despite these hardships, Denmark's resolve deepened. The resistance movement not only fought occupation, but also contributed to creating a national narrative of unity and courage. When the war ended, Denmark was liberated with the arrival of Allied forces. Although the kingdom had suffered occupation, its cities had been spared large-scale destruction, and the population had survived with comparatively fewer losses. The rescue of the Jewish community and the efforts of the resistance movement became central to post-war national identity. These events reinforced Danish values of solidarity, moral responsibility, and collective action. The end of the Second World War brought new geopolitical realities. Europe was divided into spheres of influence, and the onset of the Cold War forced Denmark to reconsider its foreign policy. Although neutrality had helped protect the kingdom during previous conflicts, the rise of the Soviet Union and the formation of military alliances across Europe made neutrality less viable. Denmark chose to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, becoming part of a collective defense system committed to deterring future conflicts. This decision reflected a pragmatic understanding that peace required cooperation with democratic allies. Post-war reconstruction also accelerated social and economic reforms. The state expanded welfare programs, improved healthcare, and invested in housing and education. Denmark embraced modernization, gradually transforming from a predominantly agrarian society into a balanced welfare state with strong social institutions and a growing industrial sector. When the Second World War came to an end, Denmark stood at a turning point. Though the nation had endured occupation, it emerged with its cities largely intact, its cultural institutions preserved, and its population united by shared experiences of hardship, resistance, and moral responsibility. These circumstances gave Denmark a foundation for rebuilding that many other European countries lacked. In the decades that followed, the kingdom transformed itself once again, this time into a modern welfare state grounded in social equality, democratic stability, and international cooperation. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Denmark's priorities centered on restoring normal life. Transportation networks needed repair, housing shortages required urgent attention, and industries had to convert back to peacetime production. Food rationing continued for several years as the country worked to address shortages and rebuild trade networks disrupted by wartime blockades. Despite these challenges, Denmark's recovery progressed steadily. The agricultural sector, long a backbone of the Danish economy, played a vital role in supplying food not only domestically, but also to war-torn countries across Europe. Danish farmers, supported by efficient cooperatives, helped stabilize the economy during the difficult transition. The political landscape also underwent far-reaching changes. Parties representing workers, farmers, urban professionals, and conservatives all played roles in the reconstruction effort, and Denmark entered the post-war era with a firm belief in parliamentary democracy. Coalition governments became common, reflecting a political culture centered on negotiation and consensus rather than ideological confrontation. This spirit of cooperation would become a defining feature of Danish politics in the decades that followed. One of the earliest and most consequential decisions Denmark faced after the war concerned foreign policy. The rise of the Soviet Union and tensions between East and West reshaped the global order, dividing Europe into rival blocs and creating what became known as the Cold War. Denmark, historically inclined toward neutrality, had to reconsider its position. The experience of German occupation had demonstrated the limitations of absolute neutrality in the face of aggressive expansionist powers. After careful debate, Denmark chose to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, becoming a founding member of a military alliance committed to collective defense. The decision marked a significant departure from centuries of cautious neutrality, signaling that Denmark now saw its security as linked to cooperation with democratic allies. Membership in the alliance brought both reassurance and responsibility. Denmark contributed to joint defense planning, modernized its military, and hosted strategic installations, while simultaneously advocating for diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution within the alliance. While foreign policy shaped Denmark's role in the world, domestic developments transformed everyday life. One of the most important trends of the post-war era was the expansion of social welfare programs. Although earlier reforms had laid the foundation, the decades following the war witnessed an unprecedented growth in public services designed to support citizens from childhood through old age. This development was driven by political consensus across parties. Conservatives, liberals, and social democrats all recognized the value of a healthy, educated, and secure population. Healthcare became a central focus. The state expanded hospitals, trained more medical professionals, and ensured that essential medical care became accessible to all. Costs that once burdened families were gradually shifted to the public sphere. Preventive care, maternal health services, and vaccinations improved life expectancy and reduced childhood mortality. Over time, Denmark developed a universal healthcare system that offered equal access regardless of income or status, one of the defining features of the modern welfare state. Education saw similar expansion. Primary and secondary schooling improved in quality and accessibility. Class sizes decreased, teacher training strengthened, and curricula modernized. Denmark also invested in vocational schools and universities, encouraging innovation, scientific research, and technological advancement. Scholarships and grants reduced barriers to higher education, helping ensure that opportunities were not limited by social class. These investments created a workforce that was increasingly skilled, adaptable, and ready to participate in a modern economy. Housing reform became another cornerstone of Denmark's post-war transformation. With significant housing shortages after the war, the government supported large-scale construction of affordable apartments and suburban homes. Many of these projects emphasized community spaces, green areas, and modern amenities, improving living conditions for families across the country. Public housing associations, often run cooperatively, played an essential role in providing stable and affordable housing options. Economic growth in the post-war decades provided the resources needed to sustain these reforms. Denmark benefited from rising international trade, particularly with Western European countries. The agricultural sector continued to innovate, adopting new technologies and improving productivity. Meanwhile, industrial sectors such as shipbuilding, manufacturing, and later electronics and pharmaceuticals expanded, supported by a well-educated workforce. The combination of social investment and economic modernization helped lift Denmark into a new era of prosperity. The political philosophy guiding these reforms became known as the Danish model, a system built on compromise between workers, employers, and the state. Labor unions negotiated wages and working conditions through collective bargaining, while employers accepted the principle of social responsibility. The state acted as a mediator, providing a safety net for those unable to work while encouraging growth and innovation. This model helped prevent major labor conflicts and fostered social cohesion. Culturally, the post-war era offered new freedoms and opportunities. Danish cinema, literature, and design gained international attention. Writers explored themes of individuality, memory, and social change. Architects and designers embraced functionalism, creating modern furniture and buildings that combined practicality with aesthetic simplicity. Danish products, from chairs to lamps, became known worldwide for their craftsmanship and minimalist elegance. These cultural achievements contributed to a renewed sense of national pride. Yet the post-war period was not without challenges. As the welfare state expanded, debates arose over taxation, individual responsibility, and the proper balance between private initiative and public support. Denmark's relatively small size and open economy made it vulnerable to global fluctuations, requiring careful economic management. The Cold War also brought anxieties, especially as tensions rose between superpowers. Nonetheless, Denmark maintained a stable democracy and avoided the extremes of political polarization seen in some other nations. The kingdom also began to redefine its relationship with Europe. As European countries sought to rebuild through cooperation, Denmark joined organizations designed to promote economic integration and prevent future conflicts. Although the kingdom did not initially join the earliest European communities, it participated actively in regional trade agreements. This cautious but deliberate engagement laid the groundwork for deeper integration in later decades. By the time Denmark entered the later decades of the 20th century, the kingdom had established itself as a stable democracy with a robust welfare system, a cooperative political culture, and a population confident in its institutions. Yet the world around it was rapidly changing. New economic forces, cultural shifts, and political debates pressed in from all sides. Denmark had to decide how closely it would integrate with Europe, how it would respond to emerging social movements, and how it would adapt its identity in a world that was becoming more interconnected than ever before. One of the most important issues facing Denmark during this era was its relationship with the developing European community. After the Second World War, various Western European nations began forming economic and political partnerships aimed at strengthening cooperation and preventing future conflicts. These initiatives eventually evolved into what would become the European Union. For Denmark, participation in this process raised difficult questions about sovereignty, economic opportunity, and national identity. At first, Denmark approached European integration cautiously. The kingdom joined regional trade arrangements, such as the European Free Trade Association, which allowed it to benefit from lower tariffs and expanded markets without surrendering political authority. These agreements helped stimulate Danish industry and agriculture, giving producers access to a growing consumer base across Western Europe. However, as the European economic community expanded and deepened, maintaining a position outside the core European institutions became increasingly challenging. Danish exporters, especially in agriculture, worried about losing access to valuable markets. Politicians debated whether the country should join the broader European project or maintain a more independent path. The public also held mixed opinions. Some Danes feared that European integration could dilute national identity or threaten the independence of key institutions. Others believed that joining would strengthen Denmark's global position and ensure continued economic growth. After extensive discussions, Denmark held a national referendum to decide whether to join the European Economic Community. The vote resulted in approval, and Denmark became a full member. This decision marked a turning point in Danish foreign and economic policy. Membership opened new opportunities for trade and cooperation, but it also brought new responsibilities and required Denmark to participate in collective decision-making alongside larger European states. Even after joining, Denmark maintained a distinctive approach to European integration. The kingdom frequently held national referendums on major European treaties and policy changes. On several occasions, Danish voters rejected deeper integration, prompting the government to negotiate special arrangements or opt-outs. These decisions reflected the ongoing tension between embracing international cooperation and preserving national autonomy. While Denmark reshaped its place in Europe, profound cultural and social changes were unfolding at home. The late 20th century was marked by a series of movements that challenged traditional norms and expanded personal freedoms. These movements transformed family life, gender roles, artistic expression, and public debate. One of the most significant developments was the rise of the women's rights movement. Women increasingly demanded equal access to education, employment, and political participation. Danish society gradually embraced new expectations regarding gender equality. Legislation improved workplace rights, provided maternity leave, and encouraged equal pay. More women entered universities and the workforce, reshaping both economic and cultural life. Over time, Denmark became known internationally for its progressive stance on gender issues. Environmentalism also gained momentum during this era. Public awareness of pollution, resource consumption, and ecological balance grew rapidly. Denmark's flat landscapes, coastline, and agricultural heritage made environmental protection a highly visible concern. The oil crises of the 1970s further underscored the importance of energy independence and sustainability. In response, Denmark invested heavily in renewable energy, particularly wind power. These early investments laid the foundation for Denmark's later global leadership in green technologies. Cultural transformations emerged alongside these political and social movements. Danish artists, filmmakers, and writers explored themes of individuality, identity, and modern life. New artistic expressions questioned old assumptions, offering bold, sometimes controversial perspectives. Danish cinema gained an international reputation for creativity and emotional depth, reflecting the nation's willingness to confront complex subjects. At the same time, everyday life in Denmark changed in ways both subtle and profound. Rising incomes, improved housing, and broader access to education gave citizens more opportunities to pursue personal interests. Consumption patterns evolved, leisure activities expanded, and cultural diversity increased. A growing youth culture embraced music, fashion, and ideas from around the world, contributing to a more globally connected identity. One of the most complex developments during this period was the arrival of new immigrant communities. Denmark, like many European nations, saw an increase in immigration due to labor shortages, humanitarian needs, and global mobility. Workers from Southern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia came to Denmark seeking employment and security. Refugees fleeing conflict also found a place in Danish society. The arrival of immigrants enriched Denmark culturally and economically, but also introduced new challenges. Debates emerged over integration, cultural differences, and social cohesion. Some Danes welcomed the diversity, emphasizing humanitarian values and the benefits of multiculturalism. Others expressed concerns about preserving national identity and managing the pace of social change. Over time, immigration became one of the most debated issues in Danish politics, influencing elections, legislation, and public opinion. Despite these tensions, Denmark maintained a commitment to balancing openness with community cohesion. Integration policies evolved, often combining support for language learning, education, and employment with clear expectations about participation in Danish society. The debates surrounding immigration reflected broader questions about what it meant to be Danish in a changing world and how the nation should adapt without losing its core values. Economic modernization accelerated during this period as well. Industries shifted from traditional manufacturing toward advanced technologies, pharmaceuticals, design, and service sectors. Danish firms gained international recognition for innovation, efficiency, and high-quality craftsmanship. The country's strong social model, characterized by cooperation between labor unions, employers, and the government, helped maintain stability and competitiveness in the global economy. Technological change also reshaped communication, entertainment, and work. Television, computers, and eventually the internet created new cultural trends and global connections. Denmark adapted quickly, becoming one of the earliest societies to embrace digital technologies. These tools influenced politics, business, and personal life, further integrating Denmark into the global information landscape. As Denmark entered the 21st century, the kingdom faced a world transformed by new technologies, global interdependence, and challenges that crossed national borders. The long historical journey from early hunter-gatherer societies to Viking seafarers, medieval kingdoms, agricultural reformers, and modern welfare builders had shaped a nation known for stability, equality, and cooperation. Yet the forces shaping contemporary Denmark required fresh thinking and renewed adaptability. Climate change, migration, global politics, and cultural transformation became central themes of the modern Danish experience. One of the most defining aspects of contemporary Denmark is its leadership in addressing climate change. The country's commitment to environmental sustainability did not begin suddenly. It emerged gradually from earlier investments in renewable energy, scientific research, and public awareness. Denmark's flat landscape, strong coastal winds, and early embrace of wind turbine technology positioned it as a pioneer in wind energy. Over decades, engineers, entrepreneurs, and government officials worked together to develop one of the world's most advanced wind power industries. This technological leadership became not only an economic asset, but also a symbol of national identity. Danish wind turbines, with their sleek designs and efficient engineering, became icons of the country's dedication to sustainable solutions. Denmark's cities and towns integrated renewable energy into daily life, encouraging energy efficiency, bicycle transportation, and public transit. Citizens adopted environmentally conscious habits, supported recycling programs, and embraced policies that promoted sustainability. Climate responsibility became a core element of Denmark's global reputation. Alongside climate leadership, Denmark faced ongoing conversations about identity in a multicultural society. The arrival of immigrants and refugees in earlier decades had brought new cultural influences, new languages, and new traditions. This diversity enriched Danish life, expanding cuisine, music, and social perspectives. Yet it also raised difficult questions about integration, shared values, and national cohesion. Debates emerged over what it meant to be Danish in a rapidly changing world. Some argued that Danish identity should evolve to reflect the realities of a multicultural society, emphasizing inclusion and shared democratic principles. Others expressed concern about preserving cultural traditions, language, and social unity. Political parties adopted different approaches, from advocating open and welcoming policies to proposing stricter rules for immigration and integration. These debates influenced elections, legislation, and national conversation. Over time, Denmark developed a complex but evolving approach that sought to balance cultural openness with an emphasis on civic participation and shared responsibility. Denmark's welfare state also adapted to new circumstances. While its foundational principles of equality, universal access, and social security remained intact, demographic changes created new financial pressures. An aging population, combined with longer life expectancy, increased demand for healthcare and pensions. Policymakers faced the challenge of maintaining high-quality public services while ensuring sustainable economic growth. Reforms adjusted retirement ages, restructured benefits, and encouraged labor market participation among younger and older citizens alike. Despite these adjustments, the welfare state continued to reflect a deep national commitment to social well-being. Public support remained strong, rooted in the belief that a society prospers when all its members have access to healthcare, education, and opportunities. Denmark's approach to social policy, blending market innovation with a robust safety net, continued to attract global interest. Technological change also reshaped everyday life. Denmark embraced digitalization early, modernizing public administration, banking, transportation, and healthcare through digital platforms. Citizens became accustomed to managing much of their daily business online, from tax payments to medical appointments. Danish designers and technology firms produced innovations that reached global markets, strengthening Denmark's position in the digital economy. Urban life evolved as well. Copenhagen grew into a model of sustainable city planning, known for its bicycle-friendly infrastructure, green spaces, and vibrant cultural scene. The capital's emphasis on human-centered design influenced cities around the world. Public architecture, new harbor developments, and innovative housing projects reflected the Danish tradition of blending functionality with aesthetic clarity. In rural areas, agricultural modernization continued. Farmers adopted advanced technologies, precision tools, and environmentally friendly practices to maintain productivity while reducing ecological impact. Cooperative structures remained vital, helping small and large farms adapt to global competition. Danish food standards, known for quality and safety, maintained strong reputations in international markets. On the global stage, Denmark played an active and principled role. The kingdom participated in international organizations, contributed to peacekeeping missions, and engaged in humanitarian efforts. Danish diplomacy emphasized cooperation, human rights, and development. Although the country is small, it leveraged its stability, technological expertise, and respected institutions to influence discussions on climate policy, international aid, and democratic governance. Denmark also maintained a strong connection to the North Atlantic territories of Greenland and the Faroe Islands. These regions, with their unique cultures and degrees of autonomy, continued to shape Denmark's understanding of partnership within a broader realm. Greenland's strategic location and natural resources attracted global attention, placing Denmark at the center of conversations about Arctic policy, climate science, and indigenous rights. Managing these responsibilities required sensitivity, diplomacy, and respect for local aspirations. Culturally, modern Denmark remained vibrant. New generations of artists, filmmakers, musicians, and authors pushed boundaries, exploring themes of identity, memory, and global belonging. Danish cinema maintained an international presence, known for its realism, emotional depth, and bold storytelling. Music festivals, contemporary art institutions, and design exhibitions contributed to a thriving cultural landscape. At the same time, Danes continued to engage in public debate about the nation's future. Issues such as digital privacy, economic inequality, and global migration remained central topics. The political system, rooted in consensus building and coalition governance, showed adaptability in addressing emerging concerns. Although disagreements sometimes intensified, Denmark's long tradition of negotiation helped the country maintain political stability. Looking ahead, Denmark faces challenges that will require the same resilience, innovation, and cooperation that have defined its history. Climate change demands even greater leadership. Global competition pressures industries to evolve. Social diversity calls for ongoing dialogue and thoughtful policy. Yet Denmark's historical trajectory demonstrates its ability to adapt. From its earliest settlers navigating a post-Ice Age landscape to medieval kingdoms forging alliances, from agricultural reformers reshaping the countryside to modern citizens building a sustainable welfare state, Denmark has repeatedly proven capable of reinvention. The story of Denmark is not one of constant triumph or uninterrupted progress. It is a story of adaptation, of finding new paths when old ones collapse, of turning loss into opportunity, and of shaping a society where shared responsibility and collective effort guide national development. Today, Denmark stands as a country deeply aware of its past, yet firmly focused on its future. Its journey offers insights not just into the history of a northern kingdom, but into how nations can evolve through cooperation, creativity, and a commitment to the common good. With this final step, the long arc of Denmark's history connects early origins to the challenges and possibilities of the present, opening the way for the next chapter that future generations will write.